Good morning. Welcome to our Friday, January 7th CAAB RFA training session. Excited to see you all this morning. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being offered virtually due to the state of emergency in Washington and the governor's proclamation. We won't have any public comment at this meeting since it is a training only. There won't be any official business by the board. With that, we'll go ahead and open with a welcome and introductions. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Okay, sorry, I was looking to see if my mute was on. Good morning. Okay, let's go. Bridget McLeeman.
Here.
Jamie Spinelli.
Here.
Karen Kameroff.
Present.
Megan Mulsoff.
Here.
Melanie Green.
Good morning, I'm here, and just an FYI, we've been having a lot of network issues, so my internet might go in and out a little bit, so apologies in advance.
Thank you for that notice. Rob Perkins.
Here.
And Alicia Topper.
Present. All right, good morning. I think we'll dive right in. Just as a note for housekeeping, there will be a break at 10 o'clock. We'll have a 10-minute break to refill our coffees. Feel free to be on or off camera this morning. The majority of the presentation will be screen share from the team at the county. And I'm excited to welcome Beth this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday, if it's your Friday. We're going to start with looking at some best practice information, homeless crisis response definitions, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the various intervention types. I'm going to do this training a little bit differently than using a PowerPoint and walking you through some generic overview items. What I'm actually going to do is share my screen and show you the Bonfire site itself and show you where you can find the RFA library documents. This way, hopefully it'll give you a little bit of information on Bonfire. You'll know where to go to get those documents, and then we can look at them together. As we're going through items, feel free to let me know if you have any questions, if you'd like me to revisit an item. I'll try to go through things fairly slow. That way we make sure we're just covering all the bases. But again, let me know if you do have any questions or if you would like to dive deeper into a given topic. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so everyone should be seeing the Bonfire site, and this is under my login here. I'm on the Homeless Crisis Response System, RFA. So I'd like to show you where you're going to be able to find the RFA library documents. So once you have been added as a reviewer, which will occur after the DCS team does an admin review for a simple pass-fail on applications received to make sure that RFA requirements were met and applications are appropriate to move forward. Once we do those pass-fail scores, we will make the applications available to CAAB. And we'll set those up in scoring groups, and we'll have some more conversation throughout the day on some Bonfire items. So eventually, when you are set up in Bonfire and you get your request to join as a reviewer, you'll see over here on the left-hand side a document link called Files. If you click on that, it's going to take you to kind of a landing page. And there's some options for internal files, public files, or attached messages. The library document is going to be under public files. And when you open the site, this is going to be everything for the applicable RFAs, all the resource documents. So you'll see one for the Homeless Crisis Response System and a second RFA library for the community action programs as well. Some documents will be carried over, will be similar between the two, and there's going to be some differences as well between CAP and Homeless Crisis Response. So I'm going to start us out with looking at our best and emergency practices definitions. And I'd also like to let you guys know that all the information that we're going to be reviewing, all the files that we're going to be reviewing in depth, I've also combined them into a single PDF, and we could email that out along with any notes or any follow-up from this meeting, just in case you would like to review everything on paper ahead of officially being added to the Bonfire site as a reviewer. Okay, zoom in this a little bit, so hopefully that's readable for everyone. Is that a good size? Okay, here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this is our best and emerging practices for the homeless crisis response system. So this document is the same document as you saw. We got to it in the resource library, the document library. This is the same exact information that applicants would have read during their application and submission process. So I'm just going to go through this document. Best and emerging practices are considered to be practices, approaches, or processes to rendering housing and or supportive services to individuals experiencing homelessness that are proven to work in producing greater than average results. There are several ways that best practices may come to gain notoriety, and their labels suggest the method time-tested, meaning the strategy has not necessarily been studied academically. Rather, a long history of success is the indicator. Emerging, meaning that all indications look promising, yet the results are not in. And the strongest form, evidence-based, meaning backed up by peer-reviewed academic studies, clearly indicating statistical significant results. A couple of these best practices include consumer involvement, peer support, and mentorship. Now, I'll say peer support will hopefully sound fairly familiar to several of you, maybe in the outreach components or in the behavioral health, mental health realms. This is a best practice, again, found to be very useful in serving persons, being trauma informed, and being more inclusive of the staff represented at agencies. So this is something that we're looking for within the applications. Trauma-informed care, often represented as the acronym TIC or TIC. And again, this one is also a best practice. You guys are able to read this whole thing. I'm going to read the main highlight here that trauma-informed care is a strength-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of responsiveness to the impact of trauma that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors, and that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. Positive youth development is something that we might see with youth-specific agencies. This is a developmental model that provides ongoing intentional opportunities for young people to participate in meaningful activities. Motivational interviewing. This is a conversation and collaboration approach between a staff person and a client. Ultimately, the goal with motivational interviewing is to elicit person-centered or client-driven change opportunities using strengths-based interviewing and helping people explore ambivalence to some of those changes. It also incorporates other best practices such as trauma-informed care, strengths-based approach, and several others are used in this approach with motivational interviewing. SOAR is a program locally and nationally. It is an evidence-based practice model designed to increase access to disability income for eligible households who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness and who have a mental health or co-occurring substance use disorder. Essentially, SOAR is a way to expedite SSI, SSDI applications, have those applications be more successful. And the application process is between a staff person and a client who appears to be eligible for those benefits. versus having a client attempt to apply for SSI, SSDI independently, and typically going through several denials before potentially being approved for those benefits. Okay, before I go on to the next page, is there any conversation or desire to check in on any one of these best practices in more detail?
Beth?
Yes.
Not at the moment, but it'd be nice to have a copy of this document.
Yes, and you guys will get a copy of the document after this meeting, again, ahead of your access to the Bonfire site. Everything that we're going to go through today will be combined into a single PDF. So it's just a long PDF that you're able to read and review, along with accessing some of these sources and information for additional readings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'd also like to tell you guys that for all of these best practices, there's lots of information. HUD, National Alliance to End Homelessness, those are great resources to learn more about these best practices and approaches to services. You will find several links again embedded into this document that you can click on for some additional resources and a deeper dive. Especially, I would recommend a deeper dive if any of these concepts are new to you and you are not familiar with them. I do recommend looking into them more, increasing your knowledge in a greater depth around these. Okay, next we're going to talk about service integration and wraparound services. So the basic framework here is that with service integration or wraparound services, programs are set up and established in a manner that allows for whole person support. So programs should not be limited in their scope in ways that they're unable to meet the basic needs and provide for overall housing stability of their clients. By including service integration and wraparound services, a program is able to more fully support a client or a household, meet all those basic needs, and ultimately ensure that more housing stability is provided. So again, fairly basic concept there, just addressing all needs of the person relevant to their intervention program as much as is appropriate for that program intervention. There are, of course, not every program can be everything to every person. But when it comes to housing stability, there are some wraparound services, partnerships, collaborations, and program design that will contribute to someone's overall stability and success in program. Housing first. Housing first. Before we dive into the definition here, I do want to make sure I take time to clarify that housing first is not housing only. There has been from time to time some concern or conversation in the community that housing first means that you are housing people with extremely high barriers who may be viewed as unlikely to be successful in a housing placement before other concerns or barriers are addressed. Now, this is not a housing first approach. This is a response and a concern that people with high barriers are going to be difficult to serve, which in itself, yes, people with high barriers are going to need more intensive supports, more responsive programs, more appropriate programs fit to meet their needs. Housing first does not mean housing only. It does not mean that you take someone who has extremely high barriers, extremely high needs, place them into housing and walk away. That's not a program. That's not responsible. That's just simply connecting someone to housing and then leaving that situation. Housing first means that you are accepting someone as they are, as they come to you, trusting that every single person deserves housing, is ready for housing, and you engage with that client in client-led decisions and explore options that are going to be appropriate for that household. Housing first includes housing placements, and housing services, along with wraparound services to promote housing stability and overall program success for that individual. So again, housing first is not housing only. It is prioritizing and believing that every person is ready for housing, deserving of housing, and can be successful in housing with appropriate supports in place. So the actual definition here is an evidence-based practice that centers on providing permanent housing first and then providing services as needed and requested. The goal of housing first is to immediately house people who are homeless. Housing comes first no matter what is going on in one's life, and the housing is flexible and independent so that people get housed easily and stay housed. So you may see in these applications, you may see varying degrees of housing first approach, and housing first will look different depending on the program type and the model of the program. So there's a housing first checklist that's available in the RFA library in the documents of, and I would suggest reading that as well, just to get some framework on what some housing first basics to program design could include. But really, depending on the program, you can change and you can model programs in varying ways to both be inclusive of clients at various need levels with various barriers, some with high needs, some with low needs. And you can still create a low barrier program while ensuring program safety. It is possible. It does require programs to think outside of traditional or historic frameworks. And it does mean that programs need to be responsive to their clients' needs on an individual basis and prepared to respond to those needs with appropriate program services. Supported employment. This is an approach to helping people with disabilities find and keep competitive employment within their communities. Supported employment occurs within the most integrated and competitive settings that enables individuals with disabilities to interact with non-disabled persons to the fullest extent possible. For more information on supported employment, please refer to SAMHSA. There's going to be a link here in the document that'll be sent out, and again, also available on Bonfire once you have access. Harm reduction approach. Harm reduction is a set of practical strategies that reduce the negative consequence associated with drug use, including safer use, managed use, and non-punitive abstinence. You may see harm reduction approaches applied in several manners. Again, this is really meant to keep clients engaged, keep clients as safe as possible, and to use approaches that are found to be more effective in maintaining that engagement and encouraging ultimate safety of the client. Progressive engagement. Progressive engagement sometimes is confused with assertive engagement. They are two different best practices. So if you do see assertive engagement, please know that it is separate from progressive engagement. Essentially, progressive engagement means that programs will provide the least intensive service or the least amount of assistance, including subsidy assistance, possible to help the household attain housing stability and positive outcomes. So the idea is that you're not providing more assistance than is necessary to achieve goals. So if a household does not need as much as assistance as another household, you are tailoring your program to provide what that specific household needs at the minimum, and you are not extending additional resources if those are truly not needed to secure housing stability and successful outcomes from a program. Again, with this, client choice should drive housing options and services. Client-centered approaches, client-led, and client-involved are going to be crucial for all programs within the RFA, at least programs that are directly serving clients. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on any of these best practices that we've reviewed so far?
I have a question.
Yes, David.
My question is with your explanation of Housing First program, and that the idea is 100% of people want housing, and you place people that are homeless immediately into a kind of housing, and then you keep them in housing for the rest of their lives. That would mean that they need to have social workers or case managers, something for the rest of their lives. What if one of them doesn't want to, let's say in 30 years, still have people still checking up on them? Are they ever allowed to say, I don't want to have people checking on me, I'm okay now? Or is that just part of the federal government's law that they have to have people keep checking on them the rest of their lives to ensure they never become homeless again? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, David. Thank you for that. So let me first clarify that housing first does not necessarily mean that supported housing services will be provided for a person's entire lifetime. Housing first can be applied to rapid rehousing programs, which are short-term in nature and ultimately focus on exiting someone to permanent housing, and that may be with or without ongoing supports. Again, that's going to be tailored to the individual household's needs. Now, the question that you had folds into the progressive engagement approach as well. So within Housing First approach, progressive engagement tells us that services and time frame and ultimate referrals to ongoing programs are going to be based upon a client's need and the minimum services and supports necessary for a household to be successful. So for one household, this could look like a diversion program where they're receiving 2 months to 6 months of financial and rent assistance in order to stabilize and then leave the homeless crisis response system. That may be to independent housing, perhaps that's to ongoing subsidized housing, income restricted housing, or another housing option that's appropriate for that household and part of their housing stability plan. It could also mean that someone is served in permanent supportive housing, which is intended to provide lifelong supports and housing for the duration that the household is still eligible. Generally speaking, most people that are eligible for PSH remain eligible for PSH for the duration of their life. Now, if someone made the choice or said, thank you so much for this program, it's been great, and I don't feel I need these services, and I'd like to make a plan to transition to non-supported housing, that would be a conversation with their case manager, right? So depending on the program that they're in, if they're in a site-based program, that may require them to relocate to new housing. The site-based program is typically restricted to program participants. If someone's in scattered site and they're able just to take over their lease fully and they can end that relationship with the program, again, that's their choice. Program participation is always optional. The client may decline those services. The client may notify the agencies of a wish to terminate that relationship and part ways. Or the client may choose to remain in program as long as they're eligible for a given program. And again, that can be anywhere from 2 months to a lifetime, depending on what that household needs and what the program is in relation to their supports. Does that help?
Oh yeah, that makes it much more clear. I appreciate you being able to explain to me in depth which program is for which and how people do have rights to decline services. And the reason I asked you that in summary is because I know somebody that was in a different type of program as a senior citizen, and it looked like it was good, and all of a sudden they had no free time. They were constantly being contacted by different people, and I gave that client the information. They had the right to tell some people, I don't want you. You're using all my time. And then that worked out well, but I wasn't sure if in this case they would have that right. So I appreciate understanding so I can explain it to clients. Thank you.
Yes, yes, very much. And that, again, that'll tie back into the progressive engagement model. So if a client is demonstrating stability, demonstrating success in obtaining their goals, and there is not a need to provide additional intensive services or intensive services to the same level as another client who may be having a harder time with their housing stability, the progressive engagement model requires agencies to modify their service engagement and their financial assistance or subsidy assistance based on individual household needs. So that way, as clients are showing higher stability and lower need for intensive services or lower need for financial assistance, programs are required to adapt what is being offered to really fit the minimum amount necessary for that stability.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions on the best practices reviewed? I'm going to scroll back up just over a few of these. So just as a check-in, we went over peer support, trauma-informed care, positive youth development, motivational interviewing, SOAR, SSI Outreach Access and Recovery, service integration or wraparound services, housing first, supported employment, harm reduction, and progressive engagement. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to additional documents. I'm going to get back to the library. And just, I hope this is a little helpful. If you guys are looking at the library documents, you will have the option to either do a direct click on this, and I believe if you prefer, you can come over to the Actions tab, and you can also hit download. You won't be able to necessarily hit delete or edit. I think those are going to be administrative allowances, but you should at least be able to download, or you can do the direct click on one of these documents. Okay, so next, we're going to look at our homeless crisis response definitions. Give that a second to load. I'm going to zoom in a bit so it's easier for folks to read along if you'd like to. Hopefully that looks okay. I think that's as large as I can go on it. Okay, so we're going to do a deeper dive into some of our intervention types. This is going to be a brief walkthrough of some of the definitions, and then we're going to spend a little bit more time doing a deep dive into the intervention types this morning. So we're going to start with rapid rehousing, or RRH, if you see that acronym for rapid rehousing. This is an intervention designed to help individuals and families, and any household composition is appropriate. So that could be individual families, couples, etc. It helps households through short-term rental assistance and supportive services. Rapid rehousing is typically less than 24 months in duration. It does not for our county-funded programs. Programs do not have to stay at that 24-month limit. Traditional or older models of rapid rehousing may still require a 24-month limit. County funds do not require this 24-month limit, or at least in this RFA, none of these funds will require that limit. So, but that is typically the longer duration for rapid rehousing program. The ultimate goal of rapid rehousing is to help households achieve stability and exit to permanent housing. So again, this could be site-based, this could be scattered site where a household can take over the lease at the end of their program. Again, site-based is going to be more specific to households being current program participants currently enrolled. Typically at the end of a program timeframe in a site-based program, households will need to move to new housing. And the goal ultimately is for rapid rehousing households to achieve their housing stability and secure permanent housing in the shortest time frame possible. Again, linking back to progressive engagement, providing the minimum amount of assistance necessary to achieve housing stability. So for some people, maybe that's 6 months. For others, maybe that's 20 months. But it should be the shortest time frame possible applicable to that household. Households served in rapid rehousing programs must meet the definition of literally homeless, which is going to include unsheltered households and persons attempting to flee DV without a safe space to live with no housing alternative options. Rapid rehousing assistance is offered without preconditions. So again, preconditions don't align with housing first, and having additional barriers to program entry is not a housing first approach. So there's no preconditions that you have to be employed to be a rapid rehousing participant. There's no condition that you have to have a certain base level of income. And yes, DV is domestic violence. Oh, let's see. There's no precondition that your criminal record has to be clear and no issues, no arrests, and there's no preconditions of active sobriety. Resources and services are provided tailored to the unique needs of the household. Services to support rapid rehousing include, oh, lost my space, sorry, include housing stabilization, housing search and landlord negotiation, financial and rental assistance, and the delivery of home and agency-based housing stabilization services. So in all of our contracts, we do require that services are offered in the field, not restricted to agency offices. Of course, there's been some adjustments in the pandemic, but ultimately the goal is to meet clients where they are and to be flexible with your service delivery, not ultra restrictive on where clients can meet you, or not creating barriers or burdens for clients to engage in case management. The caseload maximum for rapid rehousing per FTE is 30 households, and FTE stands for full-time employee. Full-time employee is defined as 32 plus hours per week, and it is for a paid staff person. We're going to look a little bit deeper at some caseload maximums, caseload examples, and how you can determine the caseload size based off reported staff persons and the reported number of clients to be served. Programs are encouraged to meet caseload sizes of 20 per FTE if possible in rapid rehousing programs. And we say encouraged because 30 is the maximum. But maximum does not mean that it is necessarily going to work or be appropriate for a given program. So let's say one rapid rehousing program has only site-based locations and they have 2 buildings within a couple blocks of each other. Their staff are not going to be commuting or traveling to very many sites if they're site-based and they're relatively close. If another rapid rehousing program operates all scattered site options and they operate that across Clark County in all areas, all the way up to the center in Vancouver, to the east side, their staff are going to be driving around quite a bit more if they're doing in-person meetings and connecting with clients. There's going to be a lot more travel time involved. Travel time adds to ultimately the amount of work and the amount of contacts that you can complete in a given week. So depending on the program, depending on the scope, there could be very valid reasons to have caseload sizes below 30. So just keep that in mind as you're reading through the RFA applications. When we get to that point, caseload should be realistic given the proposed program and considering, essentially all things that staff are needing to do to support those households, and that could include travel time. Okay, we're going to move on to permanent supportive housing. So, or PSH is the acronym for permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is a long-term housing program that provides supportive services for people who are literally homeless and who have disabilities. This is done through Housing First model. Disabilities are typically expected to be ongoing or a lifelong disability. This type of supportive housing enables people with high vulnerability and housing barriers to live as independently as possible in a permanent setting. So not every person is going to be qualified for PSH. PSH is geared or targeted toward households with higher needs. The supportive services provided in connection with housing address the special needs of individuals, such as persons with disabilities who are homeless and families with children who are homeless. This is intended to be served by a given program. Household participation in services should be voluntary, is voluntary in the case of county contracts, and case management should be community-based, again, not restricted to agency offices or requiring households to have any type of burden in order to engage in supportive services. Permanent housing can be provided in one structure or several structures at one site or in multiple structures at scattered sites. So again, going back to that, could be site-based, could be one building, could be several buildings, could be scattered across the county. And you'll see more of those details as you're reading through the applications. Caseload maximum per FTE for PSH is 20 households. It's 20, which is lower than the rapid rehousing one, because households who are coming into PSH programs typically have higher needs, higher barriers, and will require more staff time and program supports in order to maintain housing stability and reach their elected goals. Programs are encouraged to meet a caseload size of 15. So again, same 20 is the absolute maximum. Programs are encouraged to meet caseload size of 15. I also do want to note that we do have these maximums and encouraged levels because caseload size maximums are relatively new as far as the county requirement goes. Previously we had seen very high caseloads. We were seeing some concerns with program outcomes. So this idea of caseload maximum has been introduced slowly, and we're doing it in a way that we're following best practice. We're ensuring that caseloads are geared to be appropriate to really result in quality of service with good outcomes and competitive outcomes. We do want to be high performing in those outcomes, especially with permanent housing retention, permanent housing exits, and lower returns to the homeless crisis response system. So again, these have been introduced slowly, and we are just making this recommendation. Agencies can have caseload sizes that are below these maximum thresholds, and that may very likely be a positive thing. Okay, transitional housing. So I'll say for transitional housing locally has been revised, the definition of it and the requirements of it for county funded transitional housing. Part of the revision for this is that transitional housing at a national level is really meant to be intensive, site-based supportive programs up to 24 months for people who need more intensive services and are making transitions or doing further search for their permanent housing destination. Locally, we were seeing that we were not necessarily serving people with higher barriers and that there wasn't the same match for intensive site-based services. So this definition and this approach has been updated to be responsive to the needs of the homeless crisis response system and to also address the gap that we have with, we have a very high demand for permanent supportive housing spots. There's lots of people who qualify for PSH, and there are very few PSH placements in comparison. So by doing this, we are following some national best practice on what transitional housing should be shaped as, and we are also making sure to prioritize our most vulnerable households who are eligible for PSH. So transitional housing is time limited. It does include supportive services. Time limit is 24 months for persons experiencing homelessness. In Clark County, transitional housing programs serve persons who are identified through coordinated entry assessments as eligible for PSH and are unable to enter PSH due to no available program openings. Households served through transitional housing, or TH as the acronym, may or may not meet HUD's chronically homeless definition. Transitional housing programs support PSH eligible households until one of the following occurs. A PSH program spot becomes available and the household is still in need of that PSH. A household stabilizes and can transition into rapid rehousing programs or transitions into another housing option appropriate for that person. Transitional housing may be site-based or scattered site. All models must be paired with behavioral health, mental health, and physical health services. Services and supports must be available 24/7, and caseload maximum is 15 per FTE. I'd like to go back for a second on here and talk about households served may or may not meet HUD's chronically homeless definition. The reason that we have this in here is the chronic homelessness includes a very specific duration of time that someone has been literally homeless along with chronic disability or lifelong disability status. So what our community has found is that some individuals have been outside technically for the duration required to meet chronically homeless status, but ultimately documenting that because of isolation and other factors can be a challenge and a barrier to that household truly meeting HUD's definition. So we do have some PSH programs that can serve people who are literally homeless as well as people who are chronically homeless. Chronically homeless is a more strict definition to meet than literally homeless. And people who fail to meet that but have been outside for several years are still likely to need the PSH level supports. So we have that added in flexibility, again, just to match some of the local funding options that can support those PSH placements. By far, most people who are screened for PSH and eligible for PSH have experienced chronic homelessness. From time to time, again, there can be documentation issues due to isolation or loss of contact. You do have to document the full time that someone has been unsheltered, experiencing homelessness, and for various reasons that can present some barriers for clients. Okay, we're going to move on to shelter. So shelter is composed of temporary indoor housing, which households must leave at the end of their program participation. Shelters must be housing focused, low barrier, utilize the housing first approach, meet essential needs of households served, including and not limited to health and all forms of health, physical health, behavioral health, mental health. And that can be direct service or an external partnership with a provider. Safety and hygiene. All of those items need to be provided within shelter. Households are considered homeless while enrolled in this temporary housing intervention. Caseload maximum per full-time employee or FTE is 25 households. Shelter can include several types, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. For the purposes of county-funded RFA available shelter funding, it is year-round programs. So emergency shelter is an emergency program providing short-term emergency stay lodging for people experiencing homelessness. Emergency shelters can be facility-based or hotel motel voucher programs. Day shelter provides indoor shelter during daytime hours, generally between the hours of 5 a.m. and 8 p.m. Those hours can range, but that's generally considered daytime for most shelters. Day shelters serve households experiencing homelessness. A drop-in shelter is a night-by-night living arrangement. So versus a shelter where you can continue to stay there, you have an assigned room or assigned bed, a drop-in shelter is going to be a night-by-night drop-in. These are generally operated between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 a.m., sometimes known as overnight shelters. These shelters allow the household to enter and exit on an irregular or daily basis. A continuous stay shelter offers living arrangements where households have a room or bed assigned to them throughout the duration of their stay. In this RFA, we had two opportunities for shelter. We first had new shelter capacity increase, and this was available to increase the current permanently available shelter bed inventory for Clark County, or an increase in available day shelter services for adults. New shelter capacity must be available year-round and must meet the definitions of shelter within this document. So we also had an opportunity to increase existing shelter services for our current shelter providers. And this was to increase in scope, services, or staffing for a shelter program currently receiving Clark County shelter funding through a direct contract. Any proposal for increasing existing shelter services must indicate how shelter programs will meet established system performance goals, outcomes, and outputs, and support the Clark County Homeless Action Plan. Okay, we're on to targeted prevention assistance. Targeted prevention assistance is the practice of providing short or medium-term supportive services and rent assistance. Typically light touch, subsidy or rent assistance support, and other financial assistance is provided. This is provided to households at risk of or at imminent risk of homelessness. Imminent risk is typically 14 days, I believe, and at risk can be a little bit longer time frame. Households served by targeted prevention programs must have experienced homelessness in the past. And prevention connects people with the care and support needed to maintain their housing and achieve a better quality of life. All prevention programs will provide targeted prevention and approach where households are strategically prioritized to receive homeless prevention assistance based on standardized evidence-based assessment that identifies households who are at higher risk of becoming homeless. Generally speaking, households who have experienced homelessness in the past are more likely to experience homelessness again. The length of assistance for these targeted prevention programs is 2 to 6 months on average. Assistance could extend up to 24 months, although we don't typically see that. Currently during the pandemic, there is some prevention assistance through COVID relief dollars that is going for 12 months. So, depending on situations in real life, that length of assistance can vary. Hey, we're on to homeless outreach. Homeless outreach is a housing-focused service provided to persons experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Staff persons engage clients using a trauma-informed, culturally appropriate, low-barrier approach. Personal connections with healthy boundaries are formed with clients to address their immediate health, safety, and housing needs. Outreach providers utilized by nameless work groups to identify persons with the highest need and connect them to housing and other support services. Outreach staff spend much of their time with their current caseload of clients to work on housing goals and additional time with new clients or new engagements to deliver essential needs that increase health, safety, and access to housing. So I'm going to go back to that one just for a moment. It is imperative that housing-focused outreach programs are dedicating the majority of their staff time to their existing caseloads. If the majority of staff time in an outreach program is dedicated to making new engagements and that is the focus of your day-to-day work, you will never be able to have deeper conversations about housing goals, housing stability plans, and make progress with clients to exit from the street or other unsheltered locations to housing. So again, I want to stress that housing-focused outreach programs have the majority of their time dedicated to their current caseloads, and they frequently engage their clients and stay connected with them to work on their housing goals, health, and safety needs. Outreach programs can have time for new client contacts and new engagements, but this should be the minority or lesser of their available time. Outreach staff work closely with coordinated entry staff to support clients who are referred into supportive housing programs, so that collaboration piece, and maintain contact with those who are newly housed to support their transition. Oftentimes, people who have been outside for a very long time struggle with that transition from unsheltered homelessness to being in housing. It can be very traumatic. It can be just a very different situation. You're potentially removing people from their nearby supports and people that they're able to talk to daily or interact with daily, and putting people into a brand new environment. That can just simply be very traumatizing, especially if you have been outside for a very long time. It is crucial for outreach staff to stay connected with new housing programs or stay connected with their clients if they enter housing without program support, and help with that bridge between unsheltered homelessness to housing. That is crucial for success. Homeless outreach staff must be available during evening and weekends. Programs are required to adjust their outreach schedules to meet system needs. So for example, if we have tons of coverage on the weekends and we have zero coverage on a Friday, programs are going to be required to adjust their hours to make sure that Friday is covered and we have some level of outreach staff available 7 days a week for as many hours as possible to be responsive to our community. Homeless outreach programs must be available to provide services throughout Clark County. Focused service areas are permitted and should be adjusted to meet system needs. So all services in Clark County must be served by outreach teams. Outreach teams must be available and responsive to service requests throughout that county and able to go to any location. And programs may still have a focus area. So let's say an area wants to focus on North County, near the rest stop. I think it's called Gee Creek Rest Stop. But maybe an area wants to focus on that area. They can still focus on that area and have the bulk of their outreach targeted toward that area. And when service requests in other parts of the county come in, they are expected to be able to respond and contribute to the overall need in contacts and services for outreach throughout the county. Partnership with or direct services available from behavioral health, mental health, and physical health providers is required for all homeless outreach programs. The needs of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, time and time again, has shown that these are pretty essential needs, and having partnership or direct service with these types of health providers is crucial to be able in providing wraparound services that are responsive to a client's immediate health needs or even immediate safety needs. I'm going to stop there for a second. I've seen a few questions come through on chat, and I unfortunately can't see the chat during the screen share mode. So Rebecca, if you happen to, Rebecca or Alicia, if you happen to be able to see the chat, if you could give me a little help and let me know what questions are there.
Yep, I was on that for you. There's just one question. Jamie is asking specifically about homeless outreach. If someone on an outreach worker's current caseload moves into shelter before permanent housing and the client wants to maintain their work with their outreach case manager, can the worker still assist with that transition from homelessness to housing?
So perhaps, right? It's gonna go back to that progressive engagement model, and it's gonna depend on what other services and supports are available to that client. So let's say let's use for an example, let's say someone moves in to an existing 24/7 shelter that has case management support and is meeting the caseload maximum guidelines for county homeless crisis response system funding. So in theory, shelter staff will be able to support that client, help with housing stability plan, goal planning, and then ultimately the responsibility of exiting someone from a shelter program to housing falls on shelter staff, not on outreach staff. Now, let's say someone goes into a shelter that is an emergency nightly shelter. Really, the main services provided are a safe sleeping space with some relative warmth, perhaps some food, really basic light services. And there's not intensive services there. There's may not even be case management staff available. It's really just intended to be a safe sleeping space. And perhaps this program is not meeting the county required caseload maximum sizes. Maybe this program isn't even funded by the county. So you have two different shelter scenarios with vastly different services available to a given client. Now, the progressive engagement model is going to say when other services and supports are provided, you as a program provider will make services available to the extent needed to support someone in their housing stability. So if you are in the case where you're in a very basic shelter that is really just a safe sleeping space for the night, yes, it makes tons of sense to stay engaged with that household, stay connected with them, continue your outreach engagements with them because they are in a night by night shelter and they do not have guaranteed housing. And they may transition from some nights they stay at the shelter, some nights they're, back on the street or in a car. It's going to change. For the other program that has 24/7 supports, wraparound services, case management staff, it is more appropriate for that homeless outreach staff to engage with shelter staff, be available for that client to help with that bridge from unsheltered homelessness to a sheltered program, ensuring that that client can be as successful as possible in shelter, which ultimately includes having an exit to permanent housing. Now, that said, a shelter client could be in shelter for several months. And if they have access to supportive services, staff persons, and other needs to fully engage in housing stability planning, have all health, safety, and personal needs met, it would not be in line with progressive engagement for homeless outreach to just offer additional services if that household is able to connect and make those relationships with staff, right? But again, transitioning from any unsheltered location to any sheltered location, whether that's a shelter or housing, is traumatic. And there should be some crossover to ensure that that transition is smooth and that that client is supported in their new environment. And it's going to look different for different clients. Generally, we say 2 months as a transition time, but some clients may struggle more with that. Some clients may come in and out of shelter, re-enter unsheltered homelessness. So the exact services and the level of engagement and whether or not someone is added back to a homeless outreach caseload is going to be very situational dependent. Does that help, Jamie? And Rebecca, there was no other questions, right? You said?
So let's see. Jamie did say that it helps. Yes.
Okay.
David is asking if you can explain what other housing looks like. He mentions that you listed shelter appearance, what that looks like. Can you explain what other housing looks like? Is it VHA apartments, Oxford houses, for example? Example one kind said had 24-hour mental health services available on site. And then there's also scattered sites, and he wasn't totally sure. So he's just looking for a little bit more clarification on what different housing types look like.
Yes, I think, David, I might need you to clarify, but I'll respond a little bit, but let me know because I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding the question there. So when we talk about other housing types or other housing placements, specific to exits to permanent housing, that could include things like Oxford housing, adult foster home or adult care homes. That could be independent housing. That could be, living with family or friends. That could be moving into income restricted units or another permanent subsidy program, like perhaps a Section 8 program, various things of that sort. And when we talk about various shelter types, there are various shelter types available throughout the county. There's also various programs, some of which are funded by the county, some of which are not. The county funded shelters have these minimum requirements, especially with this RFA, these are going to be the requirements for shelter, again, that we've gone through here. So not every shelter in operation is going to meet county requirements in their program design and services available. For example, in this RFA, we are saying if you are applying for shelter and you would like to either be a new provider or you would like to increase your services as an existing provider, we need you to identify how you are focusing on meeting the essential needs of households, providing that in a housing focused, low barrier approach, and what that really looks like in your program design. So if a shelter program, for example, has no way to meet essential needs or no partnerships to meet health needs or complete referrals for health services, that is not in line with the requirements of this RFA. Same thing for safety and hygiene. If a shelter is not providing essential hygiene areas or essential safety needs, that is not in line with the requirements of the RFA. And I think, Rebecca, I'm going to pause and give David a chance to check in. Did I hit somewhere on what you were looking for, David?
Yeah, I think that answered, because you mentioned it could be Oxford House, it could be VHA housing, it could be with a family member, and you mentioned a few other places that it could be. So that it gave me more picture of what you were talking about, all these different places that they could end up being. It's not just like one place. There are several different options depending on the individual that could be considered appropriate new placement for housing.
Yes, and that should be really a client-led and client-involved discussion. So, a client is going to be crucial to developing that housing stability plan. And if a client says, I need this level of support, I'm not going to be successful. I need to find this option. And that's something that's realistic or is something that the client can be eligible for. Then that's a responsibility of the case manager and the client to explore those options together. Likewise, if a client says, I have this family, they live in this location, I think it's really going to be the best chance for me, I feel comfortable with it, then again, pursuing that housing option with family or friend is going to be the more appropriate choice. So again, dependent on that situation, yes, that's very true, David. Okay. David, did you have anything else in relation to that question?
I was wondering, suppose worst case scenario, because people are human, they felt that their case manager that was assigned to them, they were trying to express to them, I need this in order for me to be successful in my housing, but they felt like their case manager wasn't listening to them, wasn't providing what they need. Thought, no, you don't really need that. If that happened, because sometimes people do stuff like that, do they have a way to report and say, I'm not getting the services that I'm asking for, so that they can get it from someone else? Or are they able to make a complaint and be safe? Are they informed they can be safe to complain?
Yes. So in county contracts, agencies are required to have program policies and procedures that include grievance procedures. And that is part of something that we do as a review of documents during contract signing process. You should also see some information on program design and how Client feedback, client grievance options are offered. So hopefully in the RFA, during some of the program design discussion, you'll see some of that information. That's going to be, very detailed responses, of course, but hopefully you will see some of that information in there. If for any reason that information is not within the RFA, please know that all county contracts require a grievance and appeals process, and that has to be offered in a way that's realistically safe and accessible to clients. And it's also something that we review on quarterly reports. And then that's also then presented in CAAB meetings for a summary on those grievances received and some of the feedback forms. Rebecca usually does some summary on some of the feedback given by clients as well.
Thank you so much for explaining that.
Mm-hmm. I thought I saw something else come through in the chat, Rebecca.
Jamie mentioned she had to step away for a bit, but she will be back. And Rob wanted to verify, and I think you addressed this earlier, that DV stands for domestic violence. Those are the only other things that are questions for the group.
Okay. Okay, let me see where we're at. Okay. So we're going to get into some additional definitions here. And again, on caseload size, we're going to revisit this a few times just because it can be a confusing area. And with our caseload requirements, we want to make sure that it's clear. So I've got an example here, and we can definitely talk about this as needed. So caseload is the amount of work a staff person, not a volunteer, but a given staff person, and that's represented in the number of persons or households served. So total work compared and represented by persons served. Each person or household is actively engaged by staff persons in an ongoing relationship and sustained effort that has the purpose of securing the outcome intended by the program. An example, each month a program serves 10 households with 2 full-time employees. Staff working 32 to 40 plus hours per week are considered a full-time employee or FTE. The 2 staff provide direct services, and all 64 to 80, depending on 32 or 40, all their 64 to 80 hours per week of the employee's time are dedicated to those 10 households served. Dedicated time can include training and other job functions relevant to a specific program. Again, that's considered time dedicated to a household if it is training or job functions related to that specific program, because it is still dedicated time. If the average number of clients served throughout the year each month remains at 10 and the staffing level remains at 2 FTE, the program has an average caseload size of 1 full-time employee or FTE to 5 households. Again, if you have 2 staff averaging, 2 staff working full-time, you're averaging 10 households, and you keep those averages the same. So you consistently have 2 staff, you consistently are serving 10 households at a time. That is 1 FTE to 5 households. A case manager's caseload is their total client load compared to their total hours worked per week. Does that definition make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So one question.
Yes.
You say full-time employees is an FTE, but sometimes FTE stands for full-time equivalent. So you might have 4 part-timers. So you just do the math the other way on.
Correct. Yeah. So if you, let's say instead of 2 FTE, you have 4 part-time staff, right? And then you're still going to compare, well, what is your part-time staff? And part-time staff is going to be 31 or less hours per week.
Yeah.
So you still ultimately have to have enough staff to meet the caseload sizes, and that's gonna usually be running totals, right? Because your number of clients served in a given time frame will likely change. But in theory, if you're operating at full capacity throughout the year, the maximum households you're able to serve will be relatively similar throughout the year. I think the main variation is when new programs are starting and they're, bringing on staff, bringing on clients, getting fully ramped up. But ongoing programs that are operating at full capacity should be able to predict the number of persons served in a given time frame, or their maximum capacity in a given time frame. And that should not fluctuate too much in a year if they're at full capacity.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to talk about equity next. Equity is the guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. The principle of equity acknowledges that there are historically underserved and underrepresented populations, and that fairness regarding these unbalanced conditions is needed to assist quality in the provision of effective opportunities to all groups. So I would also recommend for a very easy to understand equity versus equality. There's a great video on YouTube. Rebecca, I don't know if you remember the name of it, and maybe we can find the link when we send out notes. But there's an example of 3 people of different heights, right? And they're all attempting to I think watch a game or watch an event over a fence. And in an equity lens, you would be setting up these persons to have any type of like step or box or structure to stand on, so that you can see over the fence based on your given height, right? The tool is based on your needs and your maybe disadvantages and disproportionate impacts. Because if you're 6 foot, maybe you don't need a box at all, right? You can see over the fence on your own. If you're my height and you're 5'2", I'm probably going to need a box, right? And just saying, well, everyone has the same platform, so therefore it's equitable, right? That's not ensuring equity. Giving someone the same exact thing is not a way that you can ensure equity in a program. Giving people different resources and tools based on historically underserved and underrepresented populations, as well as disproportionate impact from known and trusted sources, is a way to ensure that you have equity in service. Rebecca, do you want to add anything there on the difference between I don't know if there's anything else there.
I mean, if you do a Google search of equity versus equality, you'll get a myriad of papers and websites that you can look at. One of the most simple definitions that I revert back to is equality has to do with giving everyone the exact same resources, where equity involves distributing the resources based on the needs of the recipients. So you can see the difference between the two.
Thank you. Yeah, and there really are some very helpful, very helpful examples and very short YouTube videos on the difference. I do recommend checking that out. It's a very easy way to understand the difference and get a visual on it as well. Okay, we're going to move on to inclusion. Inclusion is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued, to fully participate, to bring their full, authentic selves to work. An inclusive and welcoming climate embraces the differences and offers respect in the words, actions, thoughts of all people. Inclusive practices, inclusive program design can go hand in hand with creating culturally appropriate and equity-focused work. Okay, we have housing first theory and housing first model. I think because we had spent some time on this, I'm gonna skip over these things. Again, you guys will have these as a single document and they're gonna be available in the resource library. Just a quick check, does anyone have any further questions on housing first? Okay. We're going to look at outputs versus outcomes. So outputs are the direct and measurable product of a program's activities or services, often expressed in the terms of units, hours, numbers of people, or completed actions. Outputs refer to activities you will conduct and the people you hope to reach. More than one output is necessary to produce a final outcome. Examples from programs: number of case management hours, numbers served, numbers of referrals, numbered housed, number of people who access mental health services, right? Just straight numbers, what you had done. Outcomes are the result or the impact of these activities or services, often expressed in terms of an increase in understanding and improvements in desired behaviors or attitudes of participants. A single outcome is often the result of multiple outputs. So some examples on outcomes: number of households with an increased income, percent of households stably housed 3 months after exit, reduced system reusers or reduced returns to the homeless crisis response system, length of time homeless that can be decreased. Is there any question, or Rebecca, do you want to add anything in here? I know you usually, when we can touch on this a little bit more within the PowerPoint slides when we're looking at outcomes as well.
Yeah, you did a great job. And some of the board members might remember the training we did a few years ago on outputs versus outcomes. And if interested, we could do that training again. A lot of times I think about outputs being the action and outcomes are the change.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's helpful as well. And you need those several, those several events to demonstrate that change has occurred, which is why the outputs contribute to your outcomes in a program. Okay. Systems of care.
Beth, I see that Rob has a question. He's asking, how do you gather data about outcomes?
Yes, so we have some system performance measures and base outcomes, as well as some base outputs, depending on the program type. And then agencies will also propose their own. Data on these is going to be gathered through the use of HMIS data entry, quarterly reports, and annual reports for programs. So we do look at if a program has stated outputs and outcomes, those are incorporated into their contracts, and then those are captured and reported on during their quarterly reports and annual reports. And then that data in turn is being shared with CAAB at our quarterly CAAB meeting. Or is it, Rebecca, how often do we do the outcomes update? Is it semi-annually?
We do those quarterly-ish, depending, how they lie with the bi-monthly meetings. And a lot of the times this outcomes are based on how a household or a participant feels about where they are in a program. For example, they feel like they're being heard, and that's the change. They're beginning in a lot of programs, they don't feel heard, that they need, that the assistance is being provided, and now they're being heard. They talk about now being financially stable, where you can look at the dollars in their bank account, and that may not be stable for every household. The same amount of funds isn't going to be stable for the household. So it's a conversation with the participant. They're indicating that they are stable. So that's the change, is how they feel about the situation.
All right, we're going to look at system of care. So system of care is defined as a public residential facility or program that may exit people into homelessness. I know that sounds kind of backwards, because a system of care exiting people into homelessness is not a good thing. And it's possible that people can enter homelessness from a system of care. So these things include prior residence, such as foster care home or foster care group home, hospitals or other medical facilities, jail, prison, juvenile detention, psychiatric hospital or psychiatric facility, substance abuse treatment facility, or detox center. So the emphasis here is that we want programs to collaborate with systems of care, especially outreach programs and programs aimed at prevention, targeted prevention, things of that sort. True collaboration with the systems of care is essential to ensure that people are not exiting. For example, if someone goes into a hospital or residential medical facility, gains some stability in their health needs, but is ultimately exited to homelessness, that is a negative thing. We do want our systems and our providers to be able to find ways to intervene and collaborate with systems of care to avoid that situation. And it is extremely challenging, I will say, just having, again, capacity issues and having adequate resources to do this is a tall order. Our providers are making great strides in working further with systems of care. And likewise, systems of care are making great strides in coming around to further work with our homeless crisis response system. And we still have room for improvement, much room for improvement. By and for organizations. By and for organizations are operated by and for the community they serve. Their primary mission and history is serving a specific community, and they are culturally based, directed, and substantially controlled by individuals from the population they serve. At the core of their programs, the organizations embody the community's central cultural values. These communities may include ethnic and racial minorities, immigrants and refugees, individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, individuals with disabilities or who are deaf, and Native Americans. By and for organizations are crucial to having culturally appropriate services and being able to connect and offer appropriate services to all persons in an inclusive manner while promoting equity. My hope is that you'll see some of these by and for references in partnerships within the RFAs. At very least some other equity discussions and points. But by and for agencies and organizations are one avenue and one collaboration partner that is possible for non-culturally specific agencies to become more inclusive and increase their equity focus. By and for organizations themselves may have also applied in this RFA. And I saw something come up on the chat. Was that a question?
Melanie was just letting us know that she had to step away, but she will be back.
Okay. I'll just, if there are questions in the chat, I'll feel free to interrupt me. Let me, just want to make sure I'm not missing anything there. Okay. The next documents that we're going to look at are going to be the intervention specific requirements. And actually, before I dive into the intervention specific requirements for the homeless crisis response system, Rebecca, would you like me to go to the community action RFA and pull up any best practices? Is there anything that we may have missed that isn't already covered in best practice discussion?
There are a couple of different ones that would be under best practices and community action, and that would be probably really helpful for the board to kind of see what those, where the document is and what those are. There's not many specific to community action programs.
Okay, let's take a second before we dive into the intervention specific requirements, and let's look at those. So I'm gonna, this may be also just helpful for you guys to see how to move between the two RFAs, because there are two separate RFAs, one for the homeless crisis response system that my cursor is over currently, and then one for the community action programs. So I'm gonna go into the community action programs RFA. Same thing when you're navigating to the files document, left-hand side, click on files, go to public files, and then we're going to look for the best and emergency, I keep saying emergency, best emergency merging practices and definitions for community action. So it's a tongue twister for me for some reason today. Okay, So we're going to take a look at these and we're going to focus on any that we haven't already discussed within the homeless crisis response system. Okay, I think this may have been a couple new ones, or maybe we did not spend a lot of time focusing on this. But community-based support and case management, or the idea that you are not requiring a client to come to an office or to have extreme barriers for the purpose of engaging with supportive services or case management. So this is a process to plan, seek, and advocate for and monitor services on behalf of a client, enabling social case managers in an organization or in different organizations to coordinate their efforts to serve a given client through professional teamwork, thus expanding the range of needed services. Rebecca, do you want to add anything there?
No, I just want to mention that this is a newer idea for community action programs. It's been around in the homeless crisis response system world for several years, but it's newer to, really making sure that you are doing support based on the needs of the clients versus, requiring them to come to your specific location. And so that's why we want to make sure we emphasize that for community action agencies.
Okay. We also talked briefly about strengths-based approach and how this is incorporated into things like motivational interviewing. Again, focusing on the strengths of a person and how they've been successful in the past, how they've managed to survive, and what they're bringing, and focusing on those highlights. It's not just strengths-based practice is not simply just ignoring the negative and trying to embellish things, right? That's not the approach of it. It is an active approach, service delivery, and let me see if there's a summary in here. So ultimately, helping a client identify and build their assets, recognize their inherent skills and the skills that they've used in the past to survive to this date. Because if they're seeing a case manager, they've survived, they've gone through often many experiences, have many life lessons, many skills, many strengths that they've added to their person over time. And these strengths can help elicit various change or achieve various goals. The strengths approach are scientifically grounded, ecological, taking into account the person in their environment and attentive to diversity. So again, it's an approach to recognize inherent strengths in a person and really focus on how those strengths, assets, and skills can help the person meet their specific goals and achieve stability in their life, whether that's housing, economic, or otherwise. Okay. We've talked about those. Is there anything else, Rebecca, that you want to touch on for community action programs? I think we have covered these fairly well.
No, I would just see if the board has any questions about any that they see popping up on the screen. Other than that, thank you. I appreciate going through those couple of items.
Any questions from the board? Okay, we will take a look at the housing or the intervention specific categories under the homeless crisis response system RFA. So again, I'm going to navigate back there. I'm going to go to
Beth, I have a question. This is Alicia. I'm just wanting to take the temperature of the board real quick. You've been doing a fabulous job and been presenting for about an hour and a half. I'm wondering if the board would like to move our break up, because it seems like a good point in the presentation to maybe take our 10-minute break now. I noticed people have been popping in and out. Anybody have any preference? Do we want to go for another half an hour? Or people would like to maybe take a break at this point, fill up their coffee cups.
Break sounds good.
Okay, David, thank you so much for attending this morning. You don't want to break? Okay, we're going to go ahead and power through for the next 30 minutes. Thank you for entertaining my question.
Okay, and I'll definitely say if you do need a personal break, we are recording, so just always take care of yourself.
I had a question and my mic wasn't working. Can I interject?
Oh yes.
This is Rob. Back to the document you just had on the screen with the definitions. Each of these documents had could you bring that back up, please?
Yeah.
Each of those documents had definitions, I think it was like time tested and evidence-based and I need to see the paragraph, I apologize.
No problem. It's just a second for the website to load up the files there. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, the best emerging practices.
Mm-hmm.
And those best practices are time tested, emerging, evidence-based, maybe something else. Those terms aren't connected individually to each of the items in the list. What assumption should I be making about consumer involvement, peer support, and or mentorship? I assume that it's time tested or evidence-based or.
Yeah, I would say for the purposes of the RFA, knowing whether it's a time-tested, emerging, or evidence-based practice is not necessarily something that you need to know the specific difference on. The main point here is that these interventions, services, or approaches we have identified as a best practice for homeless crisis response or community action program. And of those best practices, some of them will be time-tested, emerging, or evidence-based, but they are all best practices relevant and required within this RFA. Does that help?
A little bit. I believe it'd still be nice to know for each of those.
Yes, and I would say it's definitely a deeper dive into those categories, but for the purpose of giving you guys enough information so that you are well informed and you have the tools necessary to score these applications, I would focus on these are the identified and required best practices for these RFAs. Now, if you would like to explore them further, again, that is why there's links and resources available, as well as your independent research. And you can read further on some of these interventions to determine the time-tested, emerging, and evidence-based. Again, evidence-based is going to be, like golden standard, backed up by peer-reviewed academic studies, clearly indicating statistical significant results. Emerging means it's something that's likely new. Results things look promising, but there's not enough to say that it's evidence-based quite yet. Time-tested, meaning that it is not necessarily statistical or academic, but rather a long history of success is the indicator. So they will vary, but again, if you'd like to explore these in more detail, that's always an option to you. Again, for purposes of the RFA, please recognize all of these as best practices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this document or best practices in general? Okay. We're going to go back to our homeless crisis response system RFA. Again, going to navigate over to files. Public files is where your libraries are going to be located. And now we're going to look at some intervention specific requirements. Some of this information are things that we have already covered. So I do really want to highlight the top descriptor and some of our system goals. These are going to be minimum requirements in all programs. There is more information on here that we're just for sake of time and getting close to the 10 o'clock mark. I want to make sure that we have enough time for a solid break for everyone. So I won't go over everything in these documents. And please know these are incorporated into that single PDF that will be sent out. And again, they will be available to you when you have full Bonfire access and you can view them in the library. So we're going to start with outreach. Again, outreach is housing focused. Outreach funded through this RFA will serve persons who are unsheltered within Clark County, focus on persons who are most vulnerable. Minimum performance measures for outreach include system goals of increasing the number of outreach staff trained to conduct coordinated entry, housing, and vulnerability assessments. 100% of staff in a given outreach program must be trained on conducting these assessments. This is crucial to connect people to housing resources and screen people for housing eligibility, while also identifying the most vulnerable persons in need of housing. As placements through coordinated entry are based on that vulnerability. The exits to permanent housing are set at 50%. Some of these you will see an option for an annual increase or perhaps a decrease depending on the goal. So this is set to be that if programs are struggling to meet the baseline, so 50% being the baseline for exiting the permanent housing, they have an opportunity to show improvement over an annual basis. And that's a compliance area with contract management for DCS staff. So we want them to meet those thresholds, but we also don't want it to be impossible for agencies and programs that are showing positive growth to demonstrate that over time. So threshold and then option for service and agency or program improvement is typically incorporated into these. We also have a positive exit goal from street outreach, which is different than permanent housing. Permanent housing is going to be a specific exit to housing. Positive exit could include an exit from street outreach to, say, inpatient medical care. That's going to be seen as a positive exit because you're removing someone from unsheltered homelessness, connecting them to a new location that is intended to meet their needs or provide a specific service. So positive exits are broader than permanent housing exits, which is why the goal is higher as well at 80%. Number of individuals referred to mainstream services, 100%. Every single person should be at least referred to 211, Housing Solutions Center, be aware of just various supports that they can call in an emergency. So 100% is the goal on this one. Maximum caseload, again, 25. Individuals to maintain or increase income, 50%. Number of individuals to complete a SOAR application, 1. This is set at 1 because the SOAR application process is quite intensive, takes several months to complete, and it's not realistic unless you have lots of staff that are solely focused on doing SOAR applications to complete a high level of these in a given year. So it is set at 1 very intentionally. Okay, so we're gonna, there's also some information on here around basic requirements that I do recommend everyone read ahead of their scoring. It's gonna give you some really basic information on what we're looking for within those contracts, some basic requirements, such as participating with coordinated entry, outreach to participate with the by name list work groups, various things like that. So very good information and helpful. For sake of time, I'm going to focus on looking at some of the system performance and general outputs or outcomes. Okay, we're going to look at permanent supportive housing next. Zoom in a little bit so it's bigger for everyone. So again, PSH is housing with supportive services for people who are homeless and have disabilities. Must be done through a housing first model. So here you're going to see a few more goals compared to outreach. Outreach again is really focused on moving people from unsheltered locations to some type of shelter or housing location. That's ultimately the goal there. PSH is a housing program, so it's going to be a bit more expansive in the goals listed. So we have minimum % retention or exit to permanent housing. For PSH, Clients can either retain their existing PSH or they can exit to new permanent housing. So let's say, for example, we have a client at Lincoln Place, which is a very service-intensive site-based PSH location, and perhaps a client who is still qualified for PSH level support is identified and is interested in leaving Lincoln Place because they no longer need the intensive services of a site-based location. So they can exit to another permanent housing location, and that is still meeting that retention and exit qualification. Or if the person maintains their housing at, say, Lincoln Place, for example, then they're meeting that retention rate. So PSH is retention or additional exit to permanent housing. 95% is the goal. We have here decrease the median number of days between referral and program entry. So the number of days between a coordinated entry referral from HSC to a housing provider is the time frame that's being examined. So that way, by the time that coordinated entry makes a referral, the agency accepting that referral is responding quickly and actively engaging and searching for that client if needed, as needed, and they're able to conduct a program entry and intake in less than 10 days. So that's one time frame. The second time frame that we're also looking at is to decrease the median number of days households are homeless after entry into their program. So they've got two time frames there. The time from referral to the time that they do a program intake and they start in that program, and then the time from their program intake to the time that they are housed or that they are moving into housing. So that is a longer time frame. There's less internal controls available because you're dealing with landlords, lease agreements, housing search, and other factors. So that time frame is less than 90 days. We also have in here a goal to promote positive exits from shelter. So for most housing programs, you're going to see every 5th referral must be for a household in shelter. And this is to help increase some of the throughput in the shelter system and have some more movement so people who are at high vulnerability who enter shelter are not simply staying in shelter and helping to increase some of those positive exits. We also have maximum caseload staff here again at 20, which we've talked about. Maintaining or increased income. So you're going to see a lot of these things, right? So you're going to see permanent housing, time frames. For housing programs, you're going to see this positive exits from shelter, a maximum caseload size, maintaining or increasing income, because maintaining or increasing income is directly linked to housing stability and the likelihood of someone returning to the homeless crisis response system, as well as the SOAR application. And SOAR, again, is to help obtain SSI or SSDI benefits, which is in turn linked to increasing income for households and having more stability support with that income and benefit source. So a lot of these are going to be fairly familiar as you're looking at the documents. That's very intentional so that we can compare programs to other programs and we can see measured success in consistent ways. Okay, next up we have rapid rehousing. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, so for rapid rehousing, again, you're going to see increased exits to permanent housing. It's at 85% for rapid rehousing. The success rate in rapid rehousing compared to PSH is generally lower. PSH is the most successful homeless intervention type. Again, many programs last fiscal year were able to reach 100% retention and exit to permanent housing. Rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and shelter all have lower success rates compared to PSH. And that is across the nation. That's fairly standard. PSH is a very effective intervention. There's a goal here to decrease the median number of days between the referral, again, coordinated entry referral, program entry. You're going to see that 10 days, fairly standard, have that basic time frame expectation for programs. number of days between households who are homeless upon entry to program and to their housing date, 70 days. It is less than PSH because typically rapid rehousing clients have lower barriers than our PSH level clients. The time frame is often achievable within 70 days comparative to a longer time frame needed for PSH level supports. We have the decreased returns to homelessness in 2 years. This is not present in PSH because ultimately we have the goal to retain housing, so it's just represented in a different manner. But retaining housing is linked to a return, of course. But for rapid rehousing here, it's represented as 5%. Positive shelter exits, every 5th referral again. Caseload size 30, increasing income 50%, standard minimum. You may see RFA applications where people are proposing items that exceed these goals. So perhaps they're proposing 95% to permanent housing, or they'll have everyone housed in 45 days. That's great if programs feel that they can achieve that and they can demonstrate that to you through their RFA, and that's clear and well well described in their responses. That's fantastic. These are all the minimum performance measures that people need to meet for these given intervention types.
Beth, we have a quick question about PSH.
Yes.
Melanie is wondering if in the PSH program, is the household the leaseholder?
Potentially. So there's something called master leasing, which some agencies will utilize as a way to remove a barrier and make more units available. And generally speaking, a landlord or owner must agree that a master lease can occur. So what that looks like is an agency will actually hold the lease on a given rental unit. And then instead of having that tenant screened through the property management, there's some type of agreement between the agency and the landlord or owner in regards to that master lease and what rules apply. But ultimately, then the agency can house a person in that unit, but the agency may still hold that lease. Again, that's called master leasing. It can be an effective tool to create more housing options for people with significantly high barriers who are very unlikely to be approved for a lease in the open market. There's also programs that do direct leasing and they do not utilize master leasing. So yes, a program participant would hold the lease to their unit. Site-based locations, again, that lease is going to be contingent upon ongoing program participation. Typically for site-based locations, once your program enrollment ends, you are not allowed to continue occupancy in that unit, and you would need to work with your housing provider to look for a new unit as part of your housing stability plan and your transition plan to other housing. Does that help, Melanie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to look at shelter program requirements. So shelter, increased exits to permanent housing, 50% minimum. Shelter is lower with their exit targets. This is simply, we'll discuss this a little bit more in some of the PowerPoint presentation, but simply stated, shelter is a very expensive intervention and it typically has lower success rates. So it's very expensive in comparison to PSH or rapid rehousing in the average cost per successful exit, and it is more difficult to obtain these positive housing outcomes. That's a truth of the intervention, and hopefully with some shifts in approaches, more housing focused supports, that will change over time. But ultimately, when you're taking someone and you're giving them a rental unit, their own housing that they can stay in as long as they're eligible for the program, that is going to result in higher amounts of exiting and maintaining permanent housing. Shelter is not permanent housing. Eventually, everyone in shelter will need to exit to some type of housing. And due to shelter not being permanent housing, it's not the same as going into your own rental unit. It is a shelter environment. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in future slides, but I just wanted to highlight why this is at 50% comparative to rapid rehousing being at 85 and PSH being at 95. Maximum caseload, again, 25 for shelter. Increasing or maintaining income, 50%, again, pretty standard, and SOAR applications, 1. Okay, I believe we have 2 more to go. We'll look at targeted prevention.
So
Targeted-
Beth, we are scheduled to take a break in 8 minutes. Is this a good time to break, or do you want to go for 8 minutes, or how long do you think this segment will be?
I think we just have 2 more documents to go through, just so that you guys are aware of where they are in the library, can get a sense of the goals table at the minimums, what you should be looking for. So for example, within the RFA, if someone is proposing a targeted prevention program and they do not think that they do not propose to meet the 85% exit to permanent housing, that's not in compliance with requirements, right? So that's just something to note. But we only have 2 more of these, so I think we'll be done in just a minute or 2.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
So again, you're going to see very similar items on here. Targeted prevention is lighter touch, so you're not going to see as much as an in-depth long-term housing program like rapid rehousing or PSH. 30 limit for caseloads. And because this is a light touch service and there's not ongoing services, it is not feasible to expect targeted prevention to be able to accomplish SOAR applications, which is why it is not included here. And then we have transitional housing. So again, transitional housing is going to be very intensive, has the lowest caseload to FTE ratio at 1 to 15. And this is going to have similar goals to kind of a mix of rapid rehousing and PSH for these goals. So 85% exits, 10 days between coordinated entry and program intake, 90 days for their housing search and their transition from homelessness to being housed, less than 5% returns, prioritizing referrals from shelter at every 5th, 15 again for caseload, increasing that income to at least 50% of households who meet that goal, and the SOAR applications. Now, I will say that we also have our core system programs, which include RentWell, an opportunity to apply for RentWell. On this library document, we do not have the RentWell system performance because RentWell is a specific program owned and operated by Transition Projects out of Portland, Oregon. And for more information on the RentWell program, please visit the TPI site. I believe when we send out some notes for follow-up on this meeting, I can include the links to that. But the best way to get information is going to be going to the direct website to gather that information. So it's a little bit different from our core systems because they have their own set of requirements. Many of those you will not be able to see because the curriculum is restricted to current instructors and contracted agencies, but you will be able to get some basic information on what the RentWell program is. Essentially, the RentWell program just has to ultimately comply and demonstrate how they're going to comply with the transition project requirements and overall governance of that program. So if there is, I believe there is a RentWell application in, I'm not positive, but if someone has applied for RentWell, they definitely want to document and show how their program is going to comply with the requirements, the curriculum, and everything published by Transition Projects. Okay, I think I'm done with the information there. Again, you're going to have a lot more resources here in this library. And I think we may just be ready to transition to a break. Rebecca, do you want to add anything before we make that transition?
No, I think that's fantastic.
Apologies, it's so information heavy. Thank you guys for bearing with me. It's a lot of information. Again, you're going to get single PDF. You'll be able to read this at your leisure. You do not have to remember everything we went through. There's a ton of information and we still have more to go. So you will get that email document if you'd like to peruse it at your own convenience. You know, feel free to read it, reread it, whatever is helpful for you. I'll kick it back to you, Alicia.
Thank you so much. And for everyone, we do have a 10-minute break on our schedule. When we come back, we'll go over the RFA questions, what to look for in the RFE answers. Rebecca will be going over that. Actually, no, I retract that. We're going to bump up on the agenda the Bonfire training. So is that correct, Beth?
Oh, I can answer that for you. We incorporated it into the RFA questions.
So then before we break, does anyone have any questions about the platform Bonfire that we just reviewed as we were going through the documents? And Beth mentioned that we will be getting an email that includes the setup for login, correct?
Yes, you guys will get an email. We're going to go over it a little bit more, but ultimately the main thing that we've decided is going to be most effective for training is we've included a link to a Bonfire score training video, and you can view that at your leisure. So instead of having everyone review the video within this document and extend time, we thought it'd be more appropriate or a better use of your time to include the link in the video. You'll have that in the PowerPoint. And when you have time, you can click on that link, you can view the video, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we get into the PowerPoint and just make sure that everyone understands how to access it. But this way, if you as David needs to leave at 10, he'll have time later to look at that. If you want to look at it on the weekend or next week while we're doing our admin reviews, do it at your convenience, but it should be convenient. It's super user-friendly, and there's a lot of help resources if you have difficulties. So we'll go over more in detail after the break.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Okay. Thanks, David, for joining us this morning. Have a good day at work. Everyone, I will see you back here at 10:10, and we'll continue this great education. Thanks, everyone.
I'm going to pause the recording during our break.
With Rebecca and Beth. So go ahead and take it away.
Sorry, I was setting up my screen. Always changes every time you do something in WebEx, and I don't know where they put everything, and I have to
Yeah, no worries. And just a reminder, this is being recorded, so we are able to access this video after the session if need be.
Before I go into the presentation on how to review a request for application, I wanted to check in now that you've had 5-10 minutes to kind of absorb everything that Beth said this morning and through her great presentation, and see if there are any questions before we move on to this next portion.
The only thing for me, since this is Alicia, this being my first time reviewing applications, and I know we have several new board members, is just kind of getting an overview of the process. We did a really good job this morning going into all the definitions and taking a look at the platform we'll be using, but I didn't quite connect the dots on how all that information is going to tie together to the decisions we're going to be making on applications. So maybe a reminder of just the flow and the reason why we're going to be evaluating, why we're having this training this morning.
Yeah, so the way we have the request for application structured, applicants submitted a pre-application and then a final application. And all of the information that we're providing you today is going to feed into the questions that are being asked in the request for applications either for the homeless crisis response system or for the community action programs. This presentation that I'm actually going to give you will actually help make all of those links of where you're going to be like, oh, that's where I would go find that information. So you'll be reading the application responses. You'll see the question, the response from the applicant, and then you'll be able to pull up not only this presentation, which is going to give you some guidance, but then you'll relate that, oh, this is about transitional housing, and this is the documents that we looked at in the training, and that's where I can go to provide my, a little bit of additional information on what you should be seeing in the application. So hopefully that all makes sense. The quick overview of how the process is that the applications have been submitted. They were due January 5th. Staff are going to do an internal review of the applications, make sure that they meet the requirements of the request for application. They're submitting a proposal for what we've been asking for the different types of interventions. We'll also do an assessment of the agency to make sure that they have the fiscal capacity to be able to operate a publicly funded program. And then once we've gotten past through that administrative review, we will release the applications that are moving forward to the board. That's when you'll get your notification that you have access in Bonfire, and then you'll start your review. And then we'll do the application presentations at the March and possibly April meetings for you to kind of be able to ask questions that you might have. So we recommend reviewing the applications before the presentations. And then at the May meeting, or before the May meeting, you'll submit your scores to the applications in the system, and then we will rank them based on the highest scoring applications per intervention type. And then at the May meeting, we will review those and discuss the awarding or recommendation to award funds to the different applications. So that is kind of a general overview of the entire request for application process. Are there any
And then,
questions?
sorry, Becca, I'll also add in that once you guys have access to Bonfire, once we've completed that RFA admin review of initial pass fail, and we've forwarded eligible applications on and opened those up for your scoring. At any point in time, if you have difficulty accessing Bonfire, if you have difficulty navigating the site, there is a help feature built into the site that will address most of your questions. If for whatever reason it doesn't address the question you have, feel free to email Rebecca and I directly, and we will provide some technical assistance. But truthfully, the scoring process is fairly user-friendly. It is, once all the applications are there, it's going to be fairly clear how to navigate the documents, view all the information, and then you're putting in a simple score, and then we're going to, again, be spending more time talking about what those questions are, what potential scores could look like. So Rebecca and I will be here for support as needed. I guess that's my takeaway. There's built-in support on the website. You're going to have a training video telling you how to do everything step by step, how to go through the scoring process, review everything, help built into the website if you stumble upon a question. If that does not work, Rebecca and I are here for technical assistance. So rest assured, I think we've got you as covered as anyone will potentially need.
And just a FYI, this is my first request for application process in Bonfire, so I'm learning right along with you. So I'll be relying on Michael and Beth, who have done a request for application through this system previously. Rob, did you have a question?
I just wondered, because we did some things in Bonfire, a subset of us last year. Is this the same training as we got last year?
It's
This will be a more in-depth training, Rob. But it's gonna look semi-familiar. So it's definitely gonna you'll see as we get into it. I don't want to spend too much long, but yes, RFA processes with the county have a lot of similarities and crossover. So if you participated in the ESG CV RFA scoring subcommittee previously, some of this information is going to look very similar, and the scoring process will be also very similar as well.
Last year we were scoring organizations like YWCA and CMAR for various programs. I thought that the programs were under community relations.
So they'll be very similar programs. It's just a different set of funds that you are reviewing for. So a lot of this will look very similar for that process.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
As I go through the presentation, Michael and Beth, please feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to add to any of the information that we go over. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to throw them into the chat or to just interrupt, and we can make sure that we address questions as we go through the applications. Okay, so when you get access to Bonfire, one of the first things the system is going to ask you to do is to sign a conflict of interest statement for the request for application. So if you're reviewing both homeless crisis response system and community action programs, you would do one for each application. The conflict of interest certification is really just making sure that you don't have a conflict with any of the applicants to be able to provide or judge the application for its merits to be funded or possibly funded in the program. So those types of things would be if you are on the governing board of the nonprofit that is asking for funding. So that would be a conflict, and we would not have you score any applications that pertain to the intervention type that is being applied for. If you are an employee of a program, let's have that discussion. Typically, you don't have any influence on the operations of the agency, but it would be good to have a conversation with staff just to make sure that there is no perception of a conflict for the reviewing the applications. And then we also, really want to help you understand that we all have bias and knowledge of most of these agencies outside of this request for application, but we really have to focus on the content of the application and what they are proposing that they will do moving forward. As staff, we will then hold the program accountable to what they apply for in their application through the contracting and monitoring processes. So focus on the application, the content that they're providing, and not any outside knowledge that you have of the agencies. Any questions about conflict and bias for the applications? Okay. So this is our quick kind of overview about Bonfire, and Beth, really took you into the system so you can see how it flows, where you can look for different documents. One of the biggest things that'll be helpful for you is to know where that help function is, and that is right here, the big arrow. It is down in the left-hand side of the screen. When you log into Bonfire, just click on help, and it will take you to resources that will help you review the applications. This is a link to a 3-minute instructional video. We'll put this in the email that we send following the meeting early next week. So you have access to this. Highly recommend you go in and take a look at this. It's very quick. It's only 3 minutes, and it does give you a really nice overview of what it is to be a reviewer on the applications in Bonfire.
And I'll also note, Rebecca, I tested out the link to make sure it was still active, still worked, and you didn't have to actually log into Bonfire to use it. So all of those are true. And when I pasted the link into my web browser, I did have to hit the refresh button to get the video to load. So the page content with some PowerPoint slides, some written material, and written guides on how to score applications in Bonfire was available, but the video did not load until I hit refresh. So we'll include that note in the email, but just FYI for everyone here, if you're already trying to check out the video and you're copying that paste out right now, if it gives you like video cannot load, hit refresh. It should work fine. It worked fine when I was testing.
Thank you. This is just a quick recap. Beth showed you earlier where to go to find the files and all of those documents that are going to be really helpful as you're reviewing applications. So you'll click on files, and then public files is where you'll find that. And that's true for both the homeless crisis response system and the community action programs. They're both set up the same way. And so that's where you'll find those definitions, the housing type interventions, things like that to find for your review. And then to view the submissions, there is on this left panel, the tab for submissions, and then you'll just get a link or a list of all of the submissions. And then to the right, you'll have an actions item. You can open that and download the submissions. It'll open up a folder, a zipped folder that has everything that they submitted within the application. Bridget, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I just wondered where the conflict of interest form was. I didn't see it noted on the left-hand side there.
It's specific to when you log in as a reviewer. It will prompt
Okay.
you to do that right when you log in.
Sure.
Any other questions before we move forward? Fantastic. So the next couple of slides, oh, Bridget, you have another question?
No, I was trying to get rid of the hand.
Clicked it one too many times. Okay. So the
If you
next,
tap on the actual
All right.
hand, it will disappear.
there we go.
Sorry?
You've got,
Too, that there
Say,
There
if you
could be-
tap on the hand, it'll disappear. Where it is in your screen.
Yeah, no, it puts a cross through it, but it doesn't take it down. So
Then you have to go to the smiley face emoticons and lower it there.
there we go. I lowered it for you, Bridget.
thank you.
We love our technology, right? So the next 3 slides, I believe, are going to give you just a really high level look at what would be what type of responses to application questions would be high scoring responses or low scoring responses. So we'll just go over this real briefly. So if they're talking about multiple years of previous experience providing services with good outcomes, if they show the infrastructure and staffing in place to manage the program successfully is there, if the applicant's familiar with serving those experiencing homelessness and not new to being a provider, if they have previous contracts with the city or county and or experience with managing public funds in general, that'll be very helpful. If they provide detailed description of their program methodology, the procedures, the goals, what the outcomes are, those are all things that we should be seeing within the questions of the request for application. We also want to see them noting that they're using best practices. So that's a big reason we went over those best and emerging practices definitions. We want to make sure that they're paying attention to the terms and conditions of the RFA, that they read through that and they understand what we are asking them to be able to provide in each of the intervention types. That they provide a detailed budget that's reasonable but competitive. It leverages other resources, and then following the request for application requirement that they can't exceed 11% administrative funding for the program. We want to see a plan to respond and educate the community stakeholders regarding those services. We want to see experience with tracking data, especially in HMIS, managing different types of reports and meeting program goals that they have submitted in previous programs. We want to see experience with record keeping and privacy procedures, including HIPAA. And we want to see a timeline that is detailed, realistic, and timely. These are all things that they should be including in their responses in the questions of the RFA. Low score questions might show little to no experience providing services that they are applying for. This might not necessarily be a bad thing. They might be broadening the experience services that they're offering through their agency, but we want to make sure that we are aware that this is a new type of intervention for that agency. We definitely want to watch for, if they have that infrastructure needed to manage the program, that they show they have staff and supervising staff, fiscal staff, and so on, so that they are managing the program completely with sufficient staffing. They might not have experience managing public funds in general. Public funds come with a lot of requirements. We are, subject to audits from different levels, from the county up to federal requirements. And so there's a lot that is entailed in what they need to provide us for the program itself and invoicing, for example. They might not have a description with much detail or rationale for the service, so they're very vague. That would be an indicator that they're just not quite sure of what that program is going to look like. If they're unrealistic or ambiguous with their goals or outcomes, we really need to be specific in that information so that we have something that is measurable to show that the program is meeting the goals, meeting the requirements that we want for our community. The program details might not align well with what is being requested in the RFA. So having an understanding of what is required in each of those intervention types. So you'll look at and compare that. If their budget lacks detail or is just unrealistic, for example, if they're providing rent assistance, but the amount of rent assistance for the number of households they propose is, $1,000 a month, that's not realistic for the services or renting market that we have here in Clark County. So that would be a red flag, something we'd want to look for. If they show just a lack of experience or inability to manage data, maybe they've never used HMIS before, or they haven't done reporting on goals for their agency. And if they have little to no evidence of collaborating with other providers, agencies, and in general in the local homeless crisis response system. This is very important, and something that we call out in the request for application is that we want collaborations between agencies, because the households that we are serving often have multiple barriers to their housing stability. So how is this housing provider working with other programs in the community to provide the supports to wrap around the household to make sure that we meet all of the needs that they have? So that is something that we really want to pay attention to. So that's just a overview of what we're kind of looking for, thinking about when reviewing the request for application questions. Now we're going to go in a little bit more detail for each question of the request for application. And so this will be really helpful for during your review. You can take a look at the question, what we have identified as things to look for, and help structure what that scoring might look for each of the questions. Not every question has points to them. Some are just informational. They just need to provide us that additional information and clarity on a program. And then there are some that have points, and you'll see the difference between those in the slides. So this very first question has 0 points awarded. You see that in the title of the slide. It's question number 1. The question is identify the housing or program type proposed. And then we provide you some of that information. So they'll determine what the questions are that are answered. Some questions are designed for specific programs. These are all of the list of the different types of interventions that they could be applying for. So they just really need to select which one it is, so we understand what we should be looking for in the responses throughout the rest of the request for application. Question 2, this one has 5 points that you'll be scoring. And so the question is to briefly describe the experience of the applicant agency with this housing type or activity type as it relates to providing supportive services and or housing for people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness in Clark County. So you'll continually see the very first bullet on every slide is the question that is being asked. And then the sub bullets are going to be the information that'll help you understand what you should be looking for in that question. So for this one, we would want to see previous experience directly providing housing or services for the type of program being proposed that was identified in question number 1. We want to see previous experience providing services to the population proposed. And you can refer to question number 8 to get a little bit better understanding of what that looks like. But they should be identifying it within the response to this question. We want to see good outcomes for the previous experience or previous services if they have provided that information before or provided that service before. They should be able to kind of talk about how the outcomes that they achieved previously. And we want to look for experience providing additional services and referrals that address those barriers to housing stability. And we go back to that quite a bit, right? Wraparound services to help that household, not only in their housing stability, but stability in general. And then at the bottom of the slide, you're going to see kind of a little scale that's going to help you identify where they might be on that scoring based on what you've read in their application. So you might only give them 0 to 1 point if they don't really describe much information, they don't have much experience, and they don't give you any details about the program. Maybe they give you some experience and a little bit of detail, that would be, 2 to 3 points. If they go into detail and they really show you that they understand, they've had previous experience, they provide you how the outcomes from the previous program, and they go into and just give you that context, and you have a really clear vision of what this program is going to look like, that would be a top scoring question. And so you would look at doing 4 to 5 points for that question. I'm going to stop here because a lot of this was more the structure of how the rest of the PowerPoint's going to go, and see if there are any questions generally about this process. Okay, it also gave me a chance to take a sip of tea. Okay, so the next question is to describe the proposed program in detail. So now we're really getting into it. This is actually over 2 slides, which is why you don't see the scale at the bottom. This one is 10 points. This is really important. It's the nuts and bolts of the program information that they're going to be giving you. So we want to think about the program design as an organized set of activities with an outcome in mind. The response should provide a clear picture of what the specific services are, the best practices, who is going in the program provides those services, is it a case manager, is it a fiscal person, that type of thing. If it's collaborating with another agency to do that other type of work to provide those wraparound services. When are they going to provide those services? Why those services are necessary to produce the identified outcomes. Again, you can refer to question number 4 to see what those outcomes they're identifying in the program. It identifies that the household has a central role in determining the services and goals. We really want this to be participant focused. What are their goals? What do they want to work for? And we should be seeing that in the response to the question. We also want them to identify the target population. They should be talking about that throughout the response to the question, that they are working with rapid rehousing programs that are for people who have been homeless for many years, or chronically homeless, or that they're specifically targeting households of color, things like that. That's what we want to see in that information. And then it describes why the proposed population is being targeted. We also want to see that it describes how the program meets the appropriate program type requirements. So again, the information that Beth went over this morning, very important that you kind of review the information against what they're saying in their application. And then again, provides referrals to other community resources, that collaboration, the making sure that we're getting access to all types of programs to meet the needs of the household. Continuing the proposed program in detail, specifically for outreach programs, we should be seeing mental health, behavioral health, physical health partnerships for this for the program. We want to see that they're available different hours for providing outreach to our unhoused households, so they're available on the weekends, in the evenings. We want to make sure that we are serving the entire county, not just focused on the core Vancouver area. So we want to, there should be discussion of how they're getting out to the outlying areas, more rural areas. And then it's a housing focused outreach. So all the interactions have that goal of moving unsheltered households into housing, permanent housing, as soon as possible. So it's housing focused outreach. For transitional housing programs, we also want to see that connection with mental health, behavioral health, physical health partnerships, because we know that these households being served in the program should be higher barrier households that need some additional supports, and that we're seeing intensive services with low case sizes. So that's some of the things we want to see for those specific programs. So for this, question, if they're only giving you little detail, they're not really talking about who they're working with or the different types of services that are going to be provided or connected with, that might be 0 to 2 points in that area. If they have some details, they're really kind of getting you some information. You might have a blurry vision of what that program looks like and how it's going to operate. That might be in that medium range of 3 to 7 points. But if they're really providing a clear and comprehensive understanding of how that program is working and all of those components, then that would be a strong response to the question, and should be in that 8 to 10 point range. The next question in the Homeless Crisis Response System RFA is to specify the proposed program outcomes and how the outcomes will be measured. So we talked earlier about the difference between outputs and outcomes. This is going to play kind of a really big role in this question, because a lot of agencies identify outputs and try to talk to them as outcomes. And we know that's not the true definition of what an outcome is. Outputs are just going to be those services, number of people served. Outcomes are going to be the change that happens for that household. So we'll want to pay attention to what they're identifying as an outcome. They should clearly identify several housing-focused outcomes for the Homeless Crisis Response System request for application, not just one. There should be multiple that they're working on, and they'll be the household will identify, those outcomes that they're really wanting to work towards. It includes how each outcome is going to be measured. It describes how they're going to collect that information, what services, what outputs they're going to put into it to create that outcome. And then it should reflect the system performance measures for the program type. Again, Beth had reviewed those near the end of her session earlier today. And so you can pull those up and get an understanding of what those outcomes that they should be discussing. The information was provided to them in the RFA, so they really should be directly discussing what's in those documents in the answers to the request for application questions. So if you're seeing outputs and not outcomes, that would not score very well in their application. If they're doing kind of a little bit of both, and they've got a couple housing focused outcomes and some outputs, but really doesn't go into detail like how they're going to measure that, that would be a medium range response to the question. But if they're offering several different housing focused outcomes and outputs, it's okay to talk about outputs in here, but we really want the focus to be on outcomes. And they show you how they're going to collect that information and measure that, then that's a strong response to that question. So it warrants a higher score to the question. Question 5 doesn't have any questions to it. It's for information only. The question is, describe how the proposed outcomes indicated in question 4 were determined. This is where they're going to talk about, have we done this program before? So we have some experience, and we know that, when we serve this many households with the program model that we have, this is how many outcomes that, or how the outcomes that were achieved and how to get to that. That's what would be in here. We want to make sure that those, how they're explaining that they got to those proposed outcomes, especially if they're a brand new agency, a brand new program to that agency, that the outcomes that they're putting forth are realistic for that intervention type. And you can go and look at the Homeless Crisis Response System dashboard, or you can see, previous reports that are provided out on what could be a realistic outcome for different types of programs. We want to make sure that the outcomes meet minimum performance expectations for that intervention type that Beth had talked about earlier. And then outcomes are realistic based on credible cost per exit to or retention of permanent housing. We provided a link to the family option study for some analysis on program cost by type. And this really, it depends on the type of intervention type and all of the components that go into it to help give an idea of what that cost might look like. We want to be clear that we are not judging programs about the cost per intervention type against each other, because there are so many factors that go into the cost of providing a program, and we absolutely are not comparing cross intervention types. Permanent supportive housing versus rapid rehousing are going to have very, very different costs per intervention type for each of their programs. I'm going to take a quick break and ask for any questions.
Before, I do want to add in some information on that last bullet point as well. So the family option study is a great study. It's a little dated at this point, but it does have some great information in there, so you can see cost by some intervention types. I'll also add that because transitional housing has been revamped, right? We don't have a lot of historical information to assess the average cost per successful exit. Outreach also has had a lot of changes over the last year, so that's going to be some evolving data points, and more data is being collected on outreach programs currently than it has been in the past. Some thresholds that you might want to keep in mind, just for a quick reference. Typical local housing programs, for example, rapid rehousing or PSH, the minimum expense that you're likely to see per person for achieving a successful exit is going to be around $1,400. As to shelter, the minimum, and that's monthly, minimum monthly cost per successful exit is going to be around $3,000. Again, I do want to emphasize there that there are vast differences between programs and how expensive programs are based on what it takes to ultimately have someone achieve an exit to permanent housing and sustain that housing. So vast differences based on the intervention type. Some interventions are just simply more cost effective and more successful. And that's evidenced by history and statistics and just longevity of the programs running. So there will be variation. But if you see a program, especially for housing programs, rapid rehousing, PSH, proposing that they only need $500 in total program cost per month per household, that's concerning, right? That's a very, very low amount that barely covers a rent subsidy and doesn't really cover any staff time. Like I'm not sure how you can provide, a minimum of 2 to 4 hours of case management support and provide a subsidy at $500. So just keep those things in mind when you're looking at cost. They should be realistic for providing subsidy, providing housing cost if it's shelter, and shelter just has a lot more expenses and supplies and needs covered because someone is in shelter and there's different requirements you have to provide, meals, food, etc. There's just different situations there. But again, rapid rehousing, PSH, minimum 1,400 based on some local data from last fiscal year. And again, shelter, you're going to be looking around a minimum 3,000 per month, and that'll be per successful exit to permanent housing.
Any other or any questions before we move on to the next? Okay. So question 6 also doesn't is information only, doesn't have any points. This is regarding the Rentwell program that provides services to all participants and agencies in the homeless crisis response system. We want them to describe what they will do better or different to improve the effectiveness of the proposed program. So this would be really specific if they've provided Rentwell previously, which was overseen by Share. So if Share reapplied for Rentwell, we would want to see what they're going to do differently, do better to have a more effective program in the community. If they're new, then they would just identify what they understand of the program and provide as much detail as possible. We also want to see that there's system coordination and partnerships, that it is not just located at Share, that they are providing training to other community organizations to be able to make sure that program participants throughout the community have access to the program, and that they are identifying those access points there. So we're going to transition into what are staff or objective scoring questions. These are things that staff are going to score based on very clear outlined information for the response to that question. We still want you to look at these questions because it's going to give you good information about the program and full context. So that's why we're including those here, but just know that you won't need to be scoring those. We'll do that on our side. Question 1, for programs supporting persons who are homeless, so this includes PSH, Rapid Rehousing, Transitional Housing, Outreach, and Shelter, indicate which target populations will be served with your program. So if they're focusing on just one population, they'll get 2 points. If they're focusing on 2 populations, they'll get 4. If they're scoring or focusing on 3 or more populations, they would get the maximum 5 points.
Question about that. This is Melanie.
Go ahead.
So with the youth 12 to 24, is that if they are like unaccompanied and not with the family unit, or how would that work?
It depends on the program, but Janus Youth and their housing programs, they can only serve 18 to 24 or I think it's 17 if they're emancipated, if they have the legal emancipation, because they're putting them into housing programs and they have to be able to sign a lease. So they should, you should see that in the description of the program itself. Like they'll talk about it in the program design portion of it.
All right, great, thank you.
The second question for staff to score is, for targeted prevention and system support programs, indicate which targeted populations will be served with your program. Again, same concept here, but it's specific to targeted prevention and some system support programs. Then we're going to go back into some questions for the board to score. So question number 7 has 5 points. It's going to explain or we're asking them to explain the applicant's experience working with the proposed population. So we just talked about what those populations are. We asked them to identify what they are. Now we want to have them talk more about what that experience is. So having previous experience providing services to that population, looking for outcomes that meet or exceed the minimum system performance measures, if applicable, based on the information provided in the request for application, making sure that they're using best practices applicable for those populations being served. Different types of services are specific to different types of programs, and that they're doing an internal assessment on the outcomes and continuous improvement to make sure that the programs and the culturally specific ways that they're providing those services is being reviewed, and making sure that all populations being served are having equitable outcomes. So based on those responses, if they're providing, don't have any or very little experience with the populations they're proposing to serve, that would be low scoring. But if they, have many years of experience, they can demonstrate that they have close relationships with providers and staff on hand that are specific, know the intricacies of working with those populations, those would be higher scoring responses to the questions. Question 8, describe how the agency is prepared to serve underrepresented populations with this program. Is your agency currently working with culturally specific service providers? What recruiting practices are in place to ensure staff are representative of the populations served? So they should be listing out the population's specific trainings that their staff are going to be receiving or have received. Maybe it's a regular training regimen that they have for all of their staff. They should be describing the program staff and peer supports that reflect the populations to be served, that they're really providing, receiving that information on providing culturally specific services as identified by those populations. That they have access to interpretation services. Either they have staff that speak different languages or that they're using an outside agency. And also that they're providing their program materials in the specific language, the native language of the populations that they're serving. It's much better for those households to have information in their hand in their own language, even if they also speak English. Asking them what they prefer and making sure that the documents are available is really important. And then making If they are able to include collaborations with culturally specific groups, then that is also really helpful for them to help in their program design, for making sure that they're providing all of the culturally specific services, designing the programs, the documents, the settings, things like that, in the most culturally appropriate way. So here again, the scoring is kind of continuous, as you know, if they're not providing very much information, do not go into detail. That would be a low scoring question. But if they're providing detailed descriptions of trainings and access to trainings, if they're working with other culturally specific groups or organizations, and they have staff on hand that reflect the populations that they're serving, that would be high scoring. Question 9 is asking them to describe their approach to incorporate trauma-informed practices into their program. So they should be specifying how trauma-informed is integrated into program policies and into their service delivery. It shows commitment to including trauma-informed concepts in their staff trainings. It should be consistent with SAMHSA's concept of trauma and guidance for a trauma-informed approach. That document is available in the library for you to kind of dive more into. But here's some kind of ideas of what that includes. We just gave a brief overview for the PowerPoint, but we highly recommend that you look at the document within the library so that you have a better understanding of what a true trauma-informed approach looks like. Again, if they're, showing minimal understanding of using trauma-informed information concepts into their program, that'd be low scoring. If they can really show you the ways that they are including trauma-informed approaches, then in the program design, trainings and things like that, that would be high scoring. If they're just saying we provide a trauma-informed training to our staff, that's not enough. That would be low scoring. It's not that we really want to make sure that they are not only providing that training, but they're incorporating it within the program itself. Question number 10, this is asking, we provided the list of best and emerging practices that are in the library that we went over earlier this morning. And then we want them to identify which of those approaches that they are going to be utilizing in the program and how they will put those into practice. We want them to be specific. We want them to identify the best practice and then identify how they're going to incorporate it in the program design. So you should be looking for clear understanding of best practice and that it's applicable to the program and population that is being served. We want to see how it's being put into practice. We want to see that the staff are trained on the best practices. And then we want to see how the program examines their use of and the areas for growth in the best practice areas. So they should be able to provide you a clear understanding of best practices and how it's incorporated. Again, if they aren't able to provide you some details, or it doesn't show clear understanding of what best practices are that they're going to be using, then that would be low scoring. If they are only stating we're going to use this, and this best practice, that is not a clear understanding of how they're going to incorporate it into the program, that would be low scoring. But if they say we're going to use this best practice, we're housing first, and this is how we incorporate that into our model, and they give you details and maybe even examples, then that is more providing that information and detail into the program, and that would be a higher scoring question. I'm going to take a quick break to see if anybody has any questions or if Michael or Beth have anything to add to any of those last questions. Okay, we'll move on. Question number 11 is information only. We want you, the agency, to describe any specific eligibility requirements beyond serving those in Clark County and the required guidelines for the program, and to specify what those why those requirements exist. So this is going to be reviewed by staff, so we can really pay attention to that, because we highly encourage that programs not include additional eligibility requirements in their programs. Janus Youth is a good example of one that would. They are a youth specific program, so they would identify that we are only serving youth, say ages 18 to 24. That is understandable for the program, the agency that is providing that service. YWCA and their Safe Choice program serves survivors of domestic violence. That would be an understandable eligibility requirement for services that they are providing. But we should not see any or many or any other requirements to be able to participate in that program. So we will be paying close attention to that. And you should be reviewing that to see what types of things that programs, what barriers programs are trying to put into place for providing services in the community. We also, have identified that this information in the request for application. So we want you to know that they have to comply with the RFA requirements themselves. Question 12 is to describe how services will increase housing stability for those engaged in the program. For homeless outreach, talk about the follow-up with identified persons who are unsheltered. So they're linked to all permanent housing programs. So for all homeless crisis response system programs, you should be seeing services that address barriers that directly affect a household's ability to become or remain housed. You should see them, the agency talk about proposed program customized services to meet the needs of the household, and that they're putting a service plan together that is driven by the household. What are the goals of the household, and then work towards those. For outreach specifically, there should be housing focused programs with a bridge between unsheltered homelessness to new housing, or into new housing programs. So we should clearly see them discuss that housing focus in the outreach programs. Again, if they're providing unclear or very few details, not providing a clear picture of the services, then that would be a low scoring question, versus really getting into a detail of how they come up with the service plan, with that the goals are driven by the household, that they are doing housing focused outreach, those types of things. When they describe that in that response to the question, that would be high scoring. Question 13 is for information only. We ask the agency to describe how the proposed program will provide adequate homeless outreach services throughout all Clark County communities. They can list not applicable if they're not applying for homeless outreach. So this is specific to outreach themselves. Housing programs all go through the coordinated entry through the Housing Solutions Center, but outreach will be the ones going out into the community. So they're going to talk about how they're going to access rural areas and make sure that they're outreaching into all areas of Clark County. They'll describe the frequency of their outreach presence. They're going to include, odd hours, not normal business hours. They'll work weekends and have evening availability, and that coverage is very flexible to coverage the support system needs. They'll include the ability to serve all areas. They can focus on specific areas, especially when they know that there's encampments and things like that in specific areas. But they will, in general, we want to make sure that we're covering all of Clark County for our outreach services. We also want to hear them talk about their partnerships with behavioral health, mental health, and physical health providers. And then they should demonstrate how the program is housing focused, including caseload sizes, complying with the stated request for application requirements, and prioritizing the existing caseloads over new engagement. So there should be more work with existing households to move them into the housing, and then only adding in a few new households to engage as the program design can accommodate. Question number 14, describe your agency's success and approach in engaging unsheltered persons. So this is for programs that are serving literally homeless households. So permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, outreach, and shelter. This would not necessarily be for the core programs such as Rent Well. So they should be talking about their experience working with unsheltered persons, describing their housing focused outcomes achieved for unsheltered persons. There are a few by name lists, work groups, and so they should be talking about how they're working with those groups to provide services to engage and to understand the needs, and then identifies training for staff related to engaging unsheltered populations. So again, if they're not providing the details, it's low scoring. If they're really giving you a clear picture, that would be high scoring.
Rebecca, can I go back to that one for a second?
Yes.
So I just want to touch on a note. I think Jamie had stepped away, but I wanted to touch on this to add some clarification for Jamie's previous question around how outreach engages with clients who are placed in shelter, whether or not they should be making those engagements and what that looks like. So shelter and outreach are required to participate in by name list work groups. Other organizations are encouraged to participate or to otherwise collaborate with outreach teams so that you have a direct connection between housing programs and outreach staff persons and making that bridge, making those connections, quickly locating clients, etc. Shelter is required to participate in by name list work groups because as people are either considering shelter, perhaps coming to exit out of shelter, maybe struggling in shelter to be successful, outreach needs to be aware of those changes as well as various openings, various changes in the shelter program. That is crucial for outreach. They are the people in the field talking to individuals who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness about shelter availability and helping them get connected to those intake processes. So for that reason, if we have shelter applications, there should be clear documentation and clear statements around how they intend to participate in by name list work groups and how they will collaborate with outreach teams. It's essential for success. So I just wanted to put that in there as well. Outreach and shelter are very much connected programs and must collaborate for success on both ends.
Thank you for that additional information. Any questions before I move forward? Okay. So question number 15, how will the proposed program support outcome goals in the Clark County Homeless Action Plan? We would like the agencies to specify each impacted outcome and the target priority element of the Homeless Action Plan. If you have not reviewed the Homeless Action Plan, we really want to see that happen. You should be looking at the overall assessment of the Homeless Action Plan, but then at the end, there are all of the targeted priority goals that we have for the community. And that's where you can kind of compare the responses to this question to what's going on with the Homeless Action Plan. So the main goals are to identify, to identify and intentionally engage with those without homes in the community to better understand their barriers and goals, then connect them to housing. Under assistance, once a household has been identified, their homelessness or housing instability is resolved in an efficient manner with the least intensive supports, where the focus on those who are most vulnerable, and then resolving homelessness. So once a household is stabilized in their housing, they are connected with safety net services, remain stable, and do not become homeless again. So again, please look at the Homeless Action Plan and the strategies that are identified there, and then use that to understand where the applicant's response falls within the scoring criteria. A few details should be scored low. If they're clearly demonstrating an understanding of the goals of the Homeless Action Plan and incorporating that into their program, then they would score high on that question. How will the proposed program address system gaps in regards to disproportionately impacted households from the most recent Council for the Homeless Equity report? Some of you may remember that we kind of had Dale, when he came in, he kind of gave a brief overview of where to find the point in time count, and then the dashboard. There's also an equity report there. If you've not looked at that, we highly recommend pulling that up. This is a link to the website, to the report, so you can take a look. and be able to use that as a helpful tool in reviewing this question. Their applicant responses should identify the correlation between proposed program and identified system gaps. That should demonstrate an understanding of serving disproportionately impacted households, and they should have clear practices to assess the program equity for the program, making sure that that all households are meeting similar outcomes in their program. For this one, again, if they're providing minimal details, that would be low scoring. If they've really got different components, understanding the needs of different groups, of the gaps that are in our system, those would be high scoring responses. We want each agency to describe their program management plan. So this is where they're going to talk about their staffing, their case management to client ratio, what services they're going to provide, where the case management will be provided, what does case management support look like. They're going to identify the caseload maximum that their program is identifying to work with, and that it is under what is the maximum requirement outlined in the request for applications. So it's important to look at what they're identifying, do the math as Beth was talking about before. If they're talking about part-time employees or multiple employees, making sure there's a clear understanding that when you add that to make up a full-time employee, then they're not exceeding the caseload for their staff. If they're able to provide that clearly, high scoring question. If they provide very minimal details, do not talk about caseloads, things like that, that would be low scoring. The next question is, what anti-poverty or pay equity tools are you using to inform decisions regarding staff compensation rates? For example, the 2021 Out of Reach report for Washington State examines what wages are sufficient in your community in relation to paying rent. Describe how staff compensation rates are informed by anti-poverty or pay equity tools. Here, we want them to identify the processes that they're using to offer competitive wages to new staff. They're identifying the processes to keep current staff at competitive wages, that they're demonstrating a commitment to paying social service staff adequate pay compared to demands of their role and needed expertise to perform their job. And they demonstrate commitment to dismantling historical underpayment and undervaluing social service staff. It is frustrating to see or hear about our social service staff having to apply for the services that they are providing within their agency. So the programs that we are funding, we are pushing them to make sure that they are compensating their staff, especially when they have master's degree education to provide the services, that they should be providing that competitive wages for their staff for the programs that are being provided. So if they are not able to provide any or very little information about how they've determined what competitive wages are, that they're not evaluating wages with new and existing employees across the system, if they're not able to give us those details, that would be a low scoring program response to that question. But if they're able to show an understanding of why it's important that they pay competitive wages, that the wages they are providing are high enough to make sure that our service providers are competitive and not having to ask for assistance in our system, that's what we want to see in the responses to the question. Michael or Beth, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add just in. This is also, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but there's a significant staffing shortage in social service and the health fields right now. And a lot of this is going to circle back to adequate compensation for what you're being asked to do and how much expertise you need to do that job. So with having adequate compensation, promoting anti-poverty, promoting well-being of staff persons, programs are in turn going to have more long-term staff, more program stability, and they're going to have more stability for their clients. So this effort to fight poverty at all levels, from agency infrastructure to client services, is going to be beneficial for the community at large. And there's just great value in this. It is, like as Rebecca said, it is very frustrating to see anti-poverty or social service agencies providing services to clients, and at the same time, their staff who are being paid to provide those services are being paid low enough that they are then eligible to apply for benefits that are really meant to be geared toward people moving out of poverty, reaching stability. And we do not want programs to promote a poverty framework. We want them to dismantle that, to fight for competitive wages, and to have retention in their staff. We don't want high turnover rates. We don't want the situations where you can't hire anyone because you can't offer them enough money for what you're asking them to do. That's not a good situation to be in, and we really want people to start taking a look at this in a much closer way.
Any questions before I move to the next slide? Amy did ask in the chat about getting access to those slides. And again, all of the slides and all of the documents will be provided early next week with links to information so that you'll have everything hopefully in one email. The next question in the Homeless Crisis Response System request for application is having the agency describe their quality management plan related to accurate and complete HMIS data entry and HMIS reporting. Reporting in HMIS is a requirement of the programs, and it is very important that the information provided in HMIS is accurate and timely, so that we can use that information for assessing this, what's going on in Clark County. They are going to be required to identify when the data will be entered into HMIS. Our contracts state that data for new participants needs to be entered within 10 days of program entry, and all services need to be included by the 5th of the following month. And then we use that information when we do our invoice review for making sure that all services are entered. We need them to identify who will enter the data and who will verify the accuracy. It is, we are all human and we make mistakes. So we want to make sure that they have a clear design that there will be a review of that information before staff, county staff go in and review it against their invoice. When it's not entered accurately, we have to go back and have them make adjustments before we can move their invoice forward. So it ends up delaying payment for the agencies. We want them to identify how the program will verify accuracy of data entered prior to invoice submission. So that was just what I was talking about. And then identify participation in the HMIS data users and or the HMIS system performance work groups. Council for the Homeless leads both of those conversations, and one really dives into the data itself, and then one talks more about the system performance. And so we want to see every program that is participating in the homeless crisis response system being involved in at least one of those meetings. Question 20, describe how you will ensure program guidelines are followed, monitoring issues or findings are remedied in a timely manner, and reporting is accurate and on time. So this should describe the supervisor verification of services provided. It should show an understanding of different requirements dependent on the housing or program type. It should describe staff training and skills required to provide the services. It should also include their communication efforts to their frontline staff when changes to guidelines or monitoring issues are identified. So the frontline staff are the ones that are really operating the program. Make sure that there's communication to those staff. Indicate the commitment to work with county staff to ensure all program requirements are met and any issues are resolved quickly. As we identify things, we will communicate with the agency, and then we want to make sure that there's, a quick remedy for any issues that might come up or changes to guidelines. And then we want, or they should be describing the process for completing the required reports. We have HMIS that is entered regularly, but we also have our quarterly reports that we require from the agencies, and then an annual narrative report for each of the programs at the end of the fiscal year. So this question should, have some really good description of what they're doing to ensure that they are going to meet the requirements of the programs, follow guidelines, create guidelines if needed, follow those guidelines, and then remedy in situations as needed. Question 21, specify how the program will integrate services with other community programs to increase the stability of households while during enrollment and after program exit. At minimum, each agency must identify collaboration with mental health services, behavioral health services, and the Housing Solutions Center. Those are core program collaborations that are needed. This is where they're going to describe the relationships with other service providers to meet the needs of each participant. They'll describe the role of all the collaborating organizations in the services provided. It explains how the target population will receive the services needed for housing stability and what organizations will be providing that service. It will describe case coordination of services between organizations to achieve program outcomes, how they're going to talk back and forth to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the households that they're commonly serving, and then describe how the program will address emergent client needs after program exit, that safety net, how they can quickly come back and provide additional services to keep that housing stability. This question should be describing collaborations between other programs, not support. We don't want, and there's a question asking for actual letters for the collaboration. We do not want to see that other providers support that this program is going to be in the community. We know we need the program in the community. That's why we're doing the request for application for the program. It really should describe the relationships and how those agencies are going to work together to meet the myriad of needs that our housing, different households need to achieve housing stability and stability in general. So what does that look like? How are they working together? Not that this is the other agencies support that an agency is applying for funds. This is the objectively scored question that ties to the response that they had before. So not only are they describing that their relationships with different agencies, but now we should be seeing that the other agency understands and agrees that they're collaborating on with the program for the services. And we will be taking a look at those letters of collaboration, verifying that it does really show a collaborative effort, not a letter of support. And then all of those that meet the criteria, they will get 1 point for each of those, up to a maximum of 5 points there. This is just a list of some of the different collaborative partners that they could be working with in the homeless crisis response system, mentioning that we're requiring mental health, physical health, the Housing Solutions Center, but they could be having partnerships with many other types of programs. Janus Youth could be talking about other youth specific programs. Employment, most households are needing to maintain or increase their income. So having a collaboration with a local employment program, if they're working with families, are they connecting with DSHS? Are they working with the different school systems? And then making sure that they're also working to provide culturally specific services. They might be collaborating with a culturally specific organization to make sure that their programs meet those needs. So again, we'll determine if what they're submitting is a true collaboration and give them points accordingly. Question 22 is for information only. The question is, will this program leverage other funding sources, and to identify and describe what that means? And then we've asked them to document their in-kind resources that they are going to use for the program. So a couple of keynotes on this. In-kind resources are goods or services contributed to the program. So volunteer hours, non-cash donations. Shelters often get clothing, they get hygiene supplies, they get blankets, those types of things. And then they should only include resources that are going to be used by the proposed program, so not the organization. So if Share is applying for, and they're talking about all of the blankets that they get donated, to the organization, that's organization wide, what is going to be used within the program that they're applying for. If it's a new shelter, they should be able to identify that they receive, 100 blankets every year and 10 of them are going to be specific for this program. So they should be able to identify that it's specific to the program itself. And that was the last question for the homeless crisis response system. So I'm going to take a pause, see if there are any questions about those, and then we'll move into community action, which will go a little bit faster.
Great job, Rebecca. Give you a second to take a break.
Beth mentioned, oh, I thought I was going to do the homeless crisis response. I was like, you're already talking for 2 hours, so you let me do the second 2 hours. That's fine. Okay, so some questions in the community action request for application are the same as the homeless crisis response system. So you'll see the questions pop up, but we won't spend time on those. We'll just move forward to the next question. So just to give you a kind of a really quick overview, that there are 2 questionnaires that are in each of the requests for applications, one that's for CAAB and one that's for staff. So you'll download each of those. And then for the CAAB, all of these questions are in one tab. It shows 4 tabs across the bottom. I really don't know why. I did something when I was trying to set up the application, but all of the questions are just in the tab labeled number 1. So it should all be pretty easy there. Okay, so when we look at that tab 1, question 1.1 asks which area of need based on the most recent community needs assessment the program will address. This is for informational purposes only. It just helps us identify what they're applying for. So we specified specific areas based on the needs assessment that are available for funding under health, physical health. There's seeing a dentist, paying for dental services, and food assistance. Under asset building, there's credit repair, financial planning, budgeting classes, paying for, and then there's also under support services, there was paying for vehicle costs or paying for transportation. We did not receive any applications for transportation services, which we were surprised to not see those because we'd had heard and seen in the needs assessment that there was quite a need, but we did not, unfortunately, receive applications. So all the funding is going to be distributed into the physical health and the financial categories of applications. Question 1.2, describe the proposed program in detail. So this is similar to what we read in the homeless crisis response program request for application. Think of the program design as an organized set of activities with an outcome in mind, and then the response should provide a clear picture of what specific services the program does, mentions the best practices that will be used, who in the program provides those services, excuse me, when the service is provided, why those services are needed or necessary to provide produce the identified outcome. That's in question number, I believe, 11. That might be wrong. I'll fix that before I send it out. And then the household has a central role in determining the services and goals. That's also very similar to the homeless crisis response system. We want to make sure that it describes how the program addresses the need identified in question 3. Which may not be right. I will fix that. I'm sorry, I was doing last minute edits to this before and actually during the beginning of this meeting. We want to make sure that if there's a specific population identified, they identify why they're specifically targeting as those populations, and that they're providing referrals to other community services. Because as we know, that it takes a village to help people be stable. So if they're only providing few details, that's low scoring, but if they're really giving you a clear picture of the program, who's being served, what they're doing, then that would be a high scoring component to the application. The next question asked them to describe the need in Clark County for the proposed program. So they should be appropriately linking the proposed program directly to the community needs assessment. So they should be saying in the community needs assessment, it identified that this many people or this percentage of people or in some way identifying that, in the needs assessment, this was identified as a high need for our community. And it should reflect an understanding of why the proposed program is needed in the community. So if they keep reading in the needs assessment, it will tell them this is why people are asking for these types of services, and these are things that are linked to it. And so they should be able to relate that and identify that in the application. Because the requirement is to link services to the needs assessment, this is also a high scoring component of the application. So if they cannot link it to the community needs assessment, they should not get any points. But if they can make that clear connection, they can show maybe they cite pages in the community needs assessment, like on this page, there's a chart that says this information and really gives you an understanding of what the program is, why it's meeting the need of the needs or the identified service in the needs assessment, that those would be higher scoring question responses. I'm not going to go over this. This is one of the trauma informed. This is exactly the same as the one from the homeless crisis response system. Question 1.5 is information only. We're asking them to describe how the program will ensure only people who are low income will be assisted. Include your program income limits. This is really important because the primary funding for this program is the Community Services Block Grant, and it has a income limit specific to the program. This has been, we've talked about this a little bit before, that's kind of in flux. There's a push to move it up to 200% federal poverty level, but the current act states that it's 125%. So we'll work with the program to make sure that they understand which level that they can serve up to, but the question should be able to describe how they're going to identify the households and make sure that what they're doing to verify that they're not serving households that are over 200% of the federal poverty level, or that type of thing. Question 1.6, describe how services will assist households to move towards self-sufficiency. This is the goal of community action agencies. So they should be able to realistically describe the impact of the program on the household to create stability, that the provided services are outlasting the program, the time that they're in the program, that they will have these services, this knowledge moving forward to be able to maintain their self-sufficiency. And then it shows understanding that households have many barriers to self-sufficiency, and progress is not linear. Like they, might reach one goal, and they might have a goal of getting a job, and then a pandemic hits and they lose their job. And so just an understanding that, things will happen, but the program will be there to help support them throughout the journey to get to that self-sufficiency stage. Question 1.7 is to specify the proposed annual program outputs and how they will be measured. So this is very similar to the homeless crisis response system, but the examples here are a little bit more designed for community action programs. So output examples are going to be services provided like meals, or the number of rides provided, that type of thing, the number of clients served, referrals, things like that. What we really want to see are those outcomes and how they're going to meet the outcomes. So again, this is very similar to the homeless crisis response system, talking about the change that happens for the households versus the services that are used to go into that change. And then they should be including how the outcome will be measured. And then this is also the same as the homeless crisis response system. So once they've identified what those outcomes are, how did they determine that those outcomes for the program? So that's what this information, and this is going to be very similar to the homeless crisis response system slide. Question 1.10 is also information only, and this is just for them to identify what target populations they're going to be serving. And then question 1.11 is to specify how the program will integrate services with other community programs to increase self-sufficiency for the households while providing assistance and after program exit. Here, they're going to describe relationships with other service providers to meet the needs of each participant. So this is going back similar to the homeless crisis response system and the collaborations. So describing the roles of the collaborating organizations. This should not be that they're getting support from other agencies, that they should be providing this program. Here we want them to briefly describe the experience of the applicant agency. So this is very similar to the homeless crisis response system. We want to see if they have previous experience directly providing services for the type of the program proposed. If they should be identifying the specific population, have good outcomes, and look for experience providing additional services and referrals that address barriers to self-sufficiency. The next question, describe your program's commitment to equity and how your agency plans to put that commitment into practice in the provision of outreach services. So this is similar to the homeless crisis response system. Also, they should be able to describe the understanding that persons with different backgrounds will need different types and levels of support to achieve equivalent success rates. They should be able to include a plan to look for and measure disproportionality in all program activities and outcomes, and then include a process to assess program performance through an equity lens. So they should be really taking into consideration equity throughout the program model. The next question is describe how the agency is prepared to serve underrepresented and underserved populations, similar to the homeless crisis response system question. So they should be able to list out the population specific trainings, the staff and peer supports, making sure that they have the materials in specific languages, available interpretation services, and possibly collaborating with culturally specific groups. This is also similar, what anti-poverty or pay equity tools are going to be used. So this is similar to the homeless crisis response system. Again, we really want to make sure that they are paying their staff competitive wages commensurate to the type of job that they're doing. Question 3.1, describe your program management plan. This is very similar to the homeless crisis response system. They talk about staffing, case management to client ratio, units of service. We don't identify this client to staff, or sorry, case management to client ratio for programs because there's so many diverse programs that can apply through the RFA. So we just want to look at the information provided and make sure that it's realistic and makes sense, that the caseload that they have is not extensive. It really depends on the type of service that they're providing. Food bank is obviously going to be able to provide services to a much higher number of clients because it's very transactional, whereas an employment program would be taking more time to work one-on-one with the program participant. This is the same question as the homeless crisis response system regarding HMIS. We know that not every program is going to be able to enter into HMIS, but where they can, we have identified a requirement for that. And then they would fall under these requirements of when they have to have the data entered into HMIS and how they're going to verify that accuracy. And then we will work with the agencies to determine if HMIS is appropriate for their program. The next question is to describe how you will ensure the program is following program guidelines and monitoring requirements. So this is similar to one of the homeless crisis response system questions, where they describe the supervisor verification of services provided, the staff training, that communication between supervision and frontline staff, and communication between us and county staff and the program staff. There's no points awarded for question 4.2, but what we're asking for is what supportive services costs are included in their budget. So a lot of our programs will be providing support services such as, access to ID cards. There's a myriad of things, birth certificates, things like that are going to help in the self-sufficiency journey for the household. So we want to see what is included in their program to provide supports to the participant. Then these next ones are the questions that are scored by DCS staff. So you'll see the question and then how they would achieve points for the program. This first one is about the best or emerging practices. So we'll evaluate their response to the question and identify how many best or emerging practices they're using within their program, and then do they identify and really explain how they are meeting that program model or in design, putting that into their design. So we'll review that for the community action programs. We also asked them to describe the locations where assistance will be provided and how assistance will be accessed by people who are low income throughout all of Clark County. This was a concern of our advisory boards a few years ago, not so much now, but we're really been pushing the agencies to make sure that they don't just have site-based assistance, that they can, people can access the program either at a site-based facility or they're going out into the community to provide services, maybe at different church locations where they can put a work group together or workshop together, things like that, to make it more accessible throughout all of Clark County. So we'll evaluate what their response is there and determine if they're really doing site-based work, which may be just the only way they can do their model, or if they're really able to get out and provide services throughout the community. 1.3 is the same as the homeless crisis response system, and this is where we're going to review the letters of collaboration that they submitted, verify they are actual true collaborations, not letters of support, and then they get 5 points maximum, 1 for each true letter of collaboration. We also asked them to about program leveraging. This is even more important for the community action programs, and is something that is asked of us from Commerce regarding, you know, what type of leveraging is happening in the community. So we'll take a look at the in-kind resources that they're using and identify what would be considered leverage and give them points regarding this, where they are in conjunction to the request for funding for the program. And that is the last thing that I have for the homeless crisis response system and community action questions. So that should be every question in the request for application and a description of what you'll be looking for when you are reviewing those questions. Any questions by the board? Or any more information that Beth or Michael would like to throw in there?
Yeah, definitely speak up if you do have any questions. Hopefully this information, I know it's a lot of information and you guys are awesome for sticking in there and just taking it in like sponges. So thank you very much for your attention today. I do hope it's clear that in both the RFAs, the question outlines that ultimately the goal for staff and the portions that staff will be reviewing or scoring is simply just to do an admin pass fail and make sure that people are meeting the requirements of the RFA and meeting the program or fund requirements. Everything else is really intended to be scored by CAAB members. So hopefully that's clear throughout the presentation. Yeah, if you guys have questions, let us know. And great job, Rebecca. I know it's hard to talk without a long street.
Yeah, I would just add, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Beth, for, all the work that you put into it in the presentation. And thank you, CAAB, for taking the time. This is a lot of work, clearly, based on the information we just gave you, this is a lot to take in. And we all really appreciate you doing this. As Beth said, all we really review ultimately as staff, and all we want to review is the applicant proposing what the RFA is soliciting, okay? And then we're going to pass it on to you. So that does not mean that we are quality screening, that you will only get, anything that you rate would be okay, to come out. Like, no, we're actually, we are asking you to make some really important decisions and rank these applications. Like, you might get stuff that, the proposal responds to what was being solicited, but there may be a pretty high variance in the quality of the proposals, and that's what we are asking you to assess. So, as you can see with what we're being trained on, we are soliciting very specific things. We do want the services in this community to have a pretty high level of competence and be system oriented and really outcomes focused and be measuring progress on the things that we are trying to fund. And there really is no way for evaluators of those proposals to credibly evaluate them without having a lot of this information in context. So thank you for being willing to do that. Like, I really, really do appreciate that. The alternative is having staff do that. And these really do need to be community decisions that are not made by staff in a staff bubble. And this is how we do it. So it's not perfect, but thank you for being willing to be part of that process. So that's, you know, and again, if you have any questions throughout this process, we are here to support that. You know, please reach out to Rebecca, please reach out to Beth, you know, please reach out to me. Generally, when you reach out to Rebecca or Beth, you're also reaching out to me, and we discuss it as a group, and try to give you as well-informed an answer as we can.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts from the board?
I think it was, this is Bridget, I think it was really clear and well presented. I wondered, last time we did this, we split into groups, and then we had groups who, say the CAAB one didn't review all the CAAB applications, they did a group of them, and same with the other. So is everybody gonna review everything except those who've recused themselves?
So I did a quick look, and before the administrative review, to see if agencies can move forward in the application process. There are about 20 applications, and that would be a ridiculous number for you guys to review. So we will do that again. We'll break it down. I need to really look at, once we see how many are in each intervention type, so that we can get you an equal number of applications to review. My hope is that, you know, it wouldn't be more than 8 to 10, but I have to do some looking at all of the applications to see what that looks like. So we'll set you up into committees like we did the last time, and then you'll review all of the applications in each intervention type. So you might be permit supportive housing, outreach, and community action, or, you know, some sort of combination like that, but you'll review all of them within the intervention type.
So it might be useful to know who's recusing themselves from which type of application, so that you don't have to think about them in the numbers.
We are hopefully aware of those already.
Okay, good.
And stuff. But if you are concerned, definitely send me an email, because I'll be working through that in the next week or so. But I have a pretty good idea of who won't be able to review certain applications.
Right. Okay.
Thank you for the question, Bridget. Are there any other comments, questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Michael and Beth. I know we have another item here. It looks like it's on the screen. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So this is just kind of an overview of a lot of the things that we've talked about today. So under other business, so the recordings for both of the meetings that we had this week and the documents from the meetings, we will get out to you early next week. So you'll have that information before you do your review. We do want to have you review the Bonfire training information before you have access to those applications. So that 3-minute video, you know, as soon as you have access or availability to do that, we ask that you do that. And that way, if you have questions, you can send them to us. Our next meeting is Wednesday, March 2nd. So at our Tuesday meeting, we voted to change the date to the first Wednesday of the month, starting at 9 a.m. This will be the long meeting for the Homeless Crisis Response System application presentations. Until we really look at all the applications, I don't know exactly how long that's going to be. Looking at, you know, the total number of applications being about 20, we could do all of them in like a 4-hour, and that would be homeless crisis response system and community action programs. And then that wouldn't need to, we wouldn't need to have a special meeting in April. So when I send out the email early next week, I'll hopefully have a better idea and propose a couple of options for you guys. I know 4 hours is a really long time to meet, especially virtually. So if we want to split it into 2 meetings, then we can do that, or we can do one longer meeting and not have a special meeting in April. So I'll have more detail about that early next week.
Thank you. Any questions about action items and decision points that will be coming forward? Okay, thank you. So I did receive an email. I know at our last meeting this week, we discussed adding a committee to our board that will be legislative advocacy, and Amy will be chairing that committee. I'll be sending an email out, just kind of convening that group and setting what our process is going to be. But we did receive an email from Michael last night with an opportunity at the state level. But the request is for our board to pass a resolution in support of the Community Services Block Grant. But it was determined by the PA's office here at the county that that may not be a action that we can take on our own without the council's approval. So it would be essentially asking the state legislature to match the Community Services Block Grant funds. And the action of this board would be to reach out to our county council to ask them for their blessing and support to pass a resolution that would go forward to the legislators on that committee in support of the match. So we said we weren't going to do any local advocacy this year in light of the workload and the timeline and the fact that the legislature starts next week. But with this being tied directly to the state, we thought it would be appropriate to bring it forward for today's discussion briefly to ask if there are a couple members that would be willing to help set the stage and reach out to council in order to ask them to support that legislative action or to give us the ability to support it. Did I frame that up okay, Rebecca?
Yes, and one of the really important reasons that we wanted to bring this to the board is because this is community action is tied to Community Services Block Grant, and Washington State Community Action Program is, you know, a partner, and it's very tied into the sole basis for having a community action advisory board, and thought it was really important to bring that to you. And the request from the Washington State Community Action Partnership is designed for governing boards, which we are an advisory board. So the governing board would actually be the county council. So that's where we came into seeing if the advisory board would like to put that request to the county council for them to sign on the request.
I guess I was going to say for the action, I would love to ask Bridget, and it looks like you were about ready to say something. So to ask Bridget if she'd be willing to join me in prepping a resolution and contacting each of the council members.
I was going to make a motion that CAAB make a request to county council to support the Washington State one-on-one match of CSBG funds. I actually wasn't volunteering to sit there and email everybody. Is that the best method, or is it better to send it to council as a block through Kathleen Otto? I don't know.
Well, I would be happy to send it directly as president of the board.
Sure.
But we do have a motion on the table.
Yes.
If we have a second, we can have discussion.
I'll offer a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Rob. Is there discussion? So that's a good point, Bridget. If the board approves this action, I'm happy to work with Rebecca or Michael on prepping a resolution and then shopping it to the council to see if they would be willing to support it. But I might need your help, Bridget, if you're willing to volunteer.
Absolutely. Whatever you need.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the CAAB to take an advocacy effort for the Community Service Block Grant match funds and go to the council for support. Any other discussion?
Is there a bill number attached yet?
I didn't see one in the email.
Not that I know of.
Okay. Then once that becomes available, I'd like to look at the bill.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, hearing no further discussion, we have a motion and a second on the floor. We will use a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Thanks for bringing that forward, Rebecca and Michael. Thanks for your willing to support it, Bridget, and help me. Okay, I think that wraps up our agenda for today. This was a lot of information to absorb, not only for our newer members, but for some of our seasoned veterans as well. I just want to reiterate Rebecca, Beth, and Michael's comments that they are here to support us and to answer questions throughout this entire process. I know I myself will be reaching out to them, certainly once we get all the applications and we have our assignments in hand. But I just want to thank each of you for carving out your morning. I know this is a commitment to have these retreats, especially virtually. They can feel a bit longer when you're seated for so long without snacks, but appreciate all of you and just want to thank the county team for all of your hard work and prepping. And please do keep your eye out in your email for all of the documents. That way you can have these in hand as backup. And if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we will go ahead and adjourn. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.